Ladies and gentlemen, it is just past 3 o'clock, so I'd like everyone to please take their seats. As you can see, we're doing a little bit. Ladies and gentlemen, excuse me. Yeah, sorry. We're doing a little bit of social distancing here. As you can see, we're a little bit more spread out. Barbara Keegan she had a potential contact with the potential for somebody who might potentially have some contact with somebody, so she has decided that she's going to make sure that she is not potentially contacting any of us, so she's not going to be here today. And that's really very thoughtful of her, because the chances of her actually having come in contact with a person who has it are rather slim, but nonetheless, she's using an abundance of caution, which we should. So today, no hugging, and everybody let's demonstrate. Oh, this is the handshake of the day, or this, and that's good. So everybody keep your distance from each other. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the meeting. And I'm going to do, we'll call the meeting to order and welcome your participants. And where's my welcome notes? They're right here? No, they're right here. Thank you. Okay, so today we've got DCA's 6th Delta Stakeholder Engagement Committee meeting, and this is Wednesday, March 11th, 2020 for documentation. Thank you for joining us. We know that you are all busy and have many commitments, so while you're here, I know you're all working collaboratively to ensure everyone's time is being optimized. I'd like to thank our hosts here at the Willow Ballroom. We appreciate the use of this facility. It also has made it so we can spread out a little bit, which is awfully good. And then we can support as well as the support from our staff in setting up this meeting. And I know everybody got some last-minute phone calls, so thank you for those of you who are here, and thank you to those of you who thought it was probably best to stay away. That's good too. So the purpose of the SEC is to create a forum for Delta stakeholders to provide input and feedback on technical and engineering issues related to the DCA's current activities. The SEC is a formal advisory body to the DCA Board of Directors, and as such, and like the DCA itself, it is subject to the public transparency laws applicable to local public agencies like the Brown Act and the Public Records Act. Please note, this meeting is not part of the Department of Water Resources of California Environmental Quality Act public outreach process related to a potential Delta conveyance project. Therefore, comments made in this meeting will not be recorded or tracked for those purposes. Okay, so Jasmine, could you please do the roll? Oh, Claudia today, sorry. I was just reading my script.
Here. 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 Moran, here.
Is that it? Okay. Then let's see, we're going to move on to reminders and housekeeping, and that is right here. Please ensure all SEC members you sign in with Jasmine or with Claudia. This case, I believe today it's Claudia. Sign in with Claudia. It's critical that we have an accurate attendance sheet. Note to the public, if you'd like to speak during the public comment period, please fill out a speaker card. We've set aside time for public comment on agendized items and then also on non-agendized items, so we will separate those out. This will be following the technical discussions. Please also silence your cell phones, and that just reminded me, and I'll do that too. Okay, please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and the video will be posted on the DCA website following the meeting. For those watching the meeting video recording, please note we have rearranged the meeting space to allow additional space between committee workers and members, which may prevent the video camera from having a clear view of each member. We apologize for that, but we're trying to just follow whatever would be safe for every member. We apologize and thank you for your understanding. Restrooms are located, and they're back over there behind the curtains. Restrooms are located behind the curtains. If you need to use the restroom while the meeting is in progress, please try to stay out of the camera shot. In the event of an emergency, please be aware of where the exit doors are, and they are marked. And then at that point, if there's a need to shelter in place, please do so at your seat. Okay, so let's see, where are we? The following materials have been provided to SEC members and community in the audience. We've got the agenda for today's meeting, the meeting minutes from the February 26th meeting, a question tracking packet, a map book for each corridor that will be explained momentarily, and then we will do the PowerPoint presentation that will also be posted, and it will be updated as needed. And now some reminders and meeting norms. All the meetings are subject to the Brown Act, and we've all been trained in the Brown Act. The chair will preside over the meetings, or the co-chair. The facilitator will guide the discussion, and staff will provide technical information to support the committee's work. Each meeting will be goal-oriented and purpose-driven. Information discussed in these meetings are for information only, and the information is subject to change. This committee holds no formal voting authority, but we will seek consensus. All views will be recorded and reported. Participation in the SEC does not imply support for any proposed conveyance project. So then we're going to do, meeting overview. Today during our meeting, we'll be discussing the following. The SEC members will have an opportunity to ask technical questions on the last meeting, which was the siting of intakes, launch shafts, maintenance, and retrieval shafts. The engineering team will present integrated project siting and logistics information, and then the SEC members will have an opportunity to discuss items that are not on the agenda. Okay, now, what else? The minutes review. Okay, we come to the minutes review. Now, the minutes, I believe they were, because I read them too. As a reminder, the minutes, meeting minutes from the February 26th meeting have been circulated to you via email and have been posted on the website. If you have any additions or corrections, please provide that information to Jasmine Runquist. Okay, does anybody have any comments? No? Okay, then let us continue with our integrated project. Oh, no, Catherine, you're going to do the discussion of objectives, so go for it.
I'm not on?
You're on.
I'm on. Okay, great. Woo. All right, hey, thank you again for your attendance. What has now been declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization, so I particularly appreciate your commitment to the process. First agenda item is to provide some brief time to answer any questions that any of the members may have on the presentation from the last meeting, or any feedback from your constituents on the topics from the last meeting. I want to reiterate the time is for comments exclusively for the previous topic. We've reserved time at the end for non-agendized topics. Today's a big meeting where you're seeing the full alignment, and I want to leave lots of time for you guys to ask questions on that, so we want to kind of limit some of the more non-agendized items. So just as a reminder, at the last meeting, we focused on the maintenance shafts and the retrieval shafts. It was on the heels of talking about the launch shafts. And now, Douglas, you are very familiar with launch shafts. If you recall, the tunnel alignments along both the east and central corridors are divided into 4 drives. That means we'll have 4 tunnel boring machines tunneling about an average of 10 miles. That's the 40-mile length on both of the corridors. We spoke about a maintenance shaft about every 4 to 5 miles along the tunnel drive to allow for preventative maintenance on the machine as it tunnels the hole, and a retrieval shaft at the end of a drive to pull the TBM out of the ground. These shaft sites are far smaller than the launch shafts that we had spoke about previously, around 5 acres plus or minus versus the hundreds of acres that may be needed for a launch shaft site. We looked at layouts of these sites and provided construction schedules, estimates of truck traffic to each site. We also described our methodology for screening and selecting the sites for these facilities. So with that, I want to open it up if anyone has any questions or comments related to maintenance or retrieval shafts, and I want to apologize ahead of time if I cut off any conversations that stray off topic.
No, go ahead, man.
Valerie, do you want to, I don't want to be, you want to do the calling on people maybe, or?
Sure, Douglas, go ahead.
Pleasure to visit the launch shaft site in Redwood, Santa Clara, and there were 3 DCA staff coming with me. The site I visited was in Santa Clara, and it was for the purpose of sewage. And it sit on a 4.5 acres, and the intended length was 3.3 miles. And I have noticed a few features that they show me. First is the silt fence. So the perimeter was surrounded by silt fence, so that's to prevent any water from breaching the construction site. And they had a muck management. They had trucks coming in, and the muck were being trucked to Tracy every day. And then I also saw the 2 noisiest equipment. There was the water cooler and ventilation. And the ship piling, they told me that they did it. It was supposed to be a silent ship piling, but I didn't see it. I mean, it was already done when I was there. And then they also had a escape route for an endangered species of a mouse when they get to the Blair Island. Then we also visited the tip of the TBM, and we were told that the TBM machine, when the TBM machine takes place, we are not supposed to hear the sound from the ground. And so these were the features that I noticed on my trip. That's all.
Did you find it helpful in reference to this project, just out of curiosity?
Well, our project is 4 times as big, so I guess maybe we may have to, maybe it's not like a proportional.
Yeah, there is a bigger tunnel that we could see down in LA. It was just a longer trip. This was the closest one. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if that is something that folks want to consider, just, please send a note in. Thank you for that.
Peter.
Thank you. One of the questions I had when we were talking about the sites, the small sites and the large sites, and when I was out talking this month with people, one of their comments was, we're going to see this from the freeway. In other words, is it going to be recovered afterwards and not be an eyesore? And is there any, is it going to be a top to any of the tunnels that are coming out to use further, or will they be pretty much level with the landscape, was the real question they had.
At the end of the project, what will these shaft sites look like?
Yeah, pretty much.
I think that's going to be a topic for a future meeting.
Okay.
Some of it might have to do with dual benefits that we may want to incorporate in the project. But we plan to solicit some feedback from you all on that.
Okay, and
We want them to try to leave them as, obviously, as discreet as possible and as small as possible.
as do these people.
Sure.
And the site itself, how much of it will be percentage-wise, we talked these things being a couple hundred acres, will be recovered or not?
I think that's a good discussion for a future meeting, what
Okay.
these sites look like at
Got
the
it.
end of end of construction. I mean, certainly for a launch shaft, the shaft site itself is pretty much all that's needed, and
Right.
sort of the cone around it to get to that height. The rest of it is about what we do with the site post-construction.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's still open,
Okay, thank you very much.
yeah.
Are there any other questions regarding the launch shafts or the intakes or comments? I mean, we're at that point, I think, where we're really trying to pull information out of you to make sure that we are gleaning everything we can get so that we, as we move forward. Okay, Anna.
The landowners that I spoke with were wondering when DCA intended to contact them, and by what process were they going to take their land from them? Because it didn't seem like there was even a 3% of the folks that are out there that would be actually like willingly giving up prime farm ag land for this. So the question that they had was, when will they be notified that they are the target, and by what means does DCA intend to take their land from them for the different necessary pads?
Two things. This actually can be, well, Carrie, if you want to take that first, and then this probably can be a topic, frankly, for a future discussion in terms of what the ROA process or right-of-way process would look like.
So we did notify all of the landowners within the corridor areas as part of the scoping notification. So we sent out 14,000 postcards to let people know and have them weigh in now as to the potential location and configuration of those facilities. The process for real estate and right-of-way is a long way away. We need to make a decision before we even consider starting to consider how to acquire property. So that's really quite a ways down the road. And that's a DWR activity.
What do the landowners do if they did not receive one of your 14,000 postcards? This was a problem in the last couple iterations of this project, was there was things that were sent out that the landowners never actually received. So how would a landowner exactly go about if they think that they're in the project area in receiving one of those?
So we would really appreciate an email at DWR. So we have the general Delta Conveyance email address as well as the scoping email. And if they send a note to either of us, we'll get back to them and make sure that they're on our email list, or on our mailing list, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Great. Are there any other technical elements that need discussion, specifically to, again, the intakes? Again, there's been a lot of discussion about choosing.
Retrieval and launch shaft, or
Right.
retrieval and maintenance shafts.
Right. The retrieval and maintenance shafts, again, there was a lot of discussion at the last meeting, a lot of download of information. So if in fact you've been able to take that and get some information, or you have some responses that you want to provide in order to give us some technical guidance, we'd appreciate it. After this discussion, we're going to get deeper into exactly what we've heard from a lot of the committee members, both during the meeting and after, is that this exercise has been difficult primarily because you've had a blank canvas. And so now there's a desire to kind of flip that. So that this next bit of conversation may help that.
Okay, so Phil. So at the last meeting, we heard feedback from the committee that it would be more efficient for you all to comment on a proposed alignment plan rather than the more open-ended approach where we presented information on siting methodology and then a range of sites that were feasible. So that led to today's presentation, which includes the proposed sites for the necessary facilities along both the east and central alignments. That's what you have there in your books right now. And it also includes the logistics work that we are proposing, including road improvements, new roads in certain locations, bridges, bridge work, barge landings, rail spurs. This is the precursor work that we think needs to take place to get to these sites to do the kind of work that's being proposed. This information is, as I said, in your map book that you have. And we also, I think everyone should have a USB drive. Obviously, there's a lot of material in here. It can't be emailed, and it would be difficult to download from a site, so we've given you all drives. What you'll see is proposed alignments for both Central and East Corridor, and the layout plans in kind of very broad terms, gives you a sense of size and scale of the sites along each of the alignments. You'll see a construction duration for each facility, logistics routes, and a very rough estimate of some truck traffic. And again, as we get into more detail, we'll fine-tune this information and update it for you. So Phil is going to walk you through this. He thinks that you might be getting sick of hearing from him, but he's a little sensitive about that, so hopefully you give him a warm welcome here. In this case, please interrupt him during his presentation. We've put lots of time on the agenda for this. So rather than saving your questions at the end, if you have questions on anything he's showing you relevant to the slide, please feel free to interrupt. If we get off topic, we'll stop it. But it's really important that you guys feel comfortable understanding what he's showing you. And just a note, we're going to show you some facilities in the south around the southern forebay and connection facilities and the pump station that we haven't shown you in any detail previously. We're going to do that at the next session. I skipped ahead to get you an entire alignment so that you can start thinking more holistically about the project. So we're not skipping that. We've just done it in a slightly different sequence. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Phil to get started.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm sorry I'm going to block you guys a little bit from where I have to stand here. I would appreciate if everybody would read the disclaimer, because as we work through this stuff, we work with the environmental team, and these things undoubtedly will change over time. So I'm going to show you where we're at today and where we're headed with the project. We'll start with the Central Corridor site plans, and we'll start in the north at intakes 2 and 3. So what we're showing you is what we're calling the 6,000 CFS project, which is 2 out of the 3 intakes. So I've got a couple slides here for if we went with intakes 2 and 3, and then I've got a couple slides for if we go with intakes 3 and 4. So we'll start with the intakes 2 and 3 site plan. So as you'll recall, we went over intake siting studies I don't know, so a month or more ago, and we selected intakes 2 and 3 because of their characteristics relative to the river and the developed community and their proximity to other sites. And as you may recall, intake 2 was the shallowest, and intake 3 was the deepest. So when we do finally lay out the structures there, intake 2 will be the longest one, and intake 3 will be the shortest for the vertical plate screen option. So then there's the tunnel between the intakes, and then it leaves the bottom of the page. So as far as access to the intakes, the concept is to put essentially a big park and ride up at the I-5 interchange with Hood Franklin Road, where we'll consolidate deliveries, employees will park there, we'll bus them in and out of the site, and we'll also have the concrete batch plant there, and hopefully develop a team of trucks that just run back and forth to the intakes. The other concept is to widen Hood Franklin Road down to just when you get over the slough, and then build a new haul road at the base of the old railroad levee along the backs of the fields, and then that takes you up to each site. The concept here is to keep not to make traffic on Hood Franklin Road any worse. We haven't gotten into the details about whether this is a dedicated lane or not yet, but those are the kinds of things we're looking at. And the haul roads would be generally reserved just for construction, so that and those haul roads also may be used, may become permanent for the removal of sediment in the future. So because intakes 2 and 3 result in a longer tunnel up to the north, we have to have an extra maintenance shaft between there and the drive site, which we'll get to in a minute. So I'm going to show you that we have sited a maintenance shaft right on the edge. I believe that's the Stone Lakes area there where Lambert Road goes over. And you can see the site there where the tunnel goes through. The concept here is to develop a new interchange on Lambert Road that would also be used for some of the intake and the tunnel support traffic, because this road is not heavily used today because there's no interchange on the freeway. And then this is the same haul roads that allow us to use some of the facilities from below to also serve the intake, so we stay off the existing roads in that area. Sure, Jim.
So could you just go back to the Hood Franklin image just for a second?
This one here?
Yeah, so it says widening, and then you talk about haul roads. I mean, is it going to be widened, or are you going to put a parallel haul road? I mean, have you...
That, we haven't completely determined, but, well, we're going to widen it. It'll be the same road. Whether or not the new lane is dedicated to construction traffic or not hasn't been decided. It may just be a wider road for everybody, and we share it.
Okay, so then it says interchange improvements. That's a cloverleaf already. What kind of improvements are necessary to go over I-5?
It's mainly about how the off-ramps interact with the road to make it more efficient for the traffic that'll be coming in and out of the consolidation center. I'd have to get one of the road guys to give you the specifics.
Okay, so my other point is going to be this, is that when you go east of I-5 on Hood Franklin, that's a busy road because it dumps into the school right there and into Franklin. And it's going to create a bottleneck, I think, when you start going east, unless that road is also improved.
Okay, well, that's good feedback.
You know,
we should capture
that makes sense. And I don't mean to get too technical here. Well, when you say haul roads, you know, to me, haul roads have a really specific purpose, and they're designed for just a project-specific purpose. So, would they, since they have a limited purpose, would they be removed at the end of the project and reclaimed?
Some of them would, but it depends on, again, feedback from you and other folks through the process about how to remove sediment from the sites. We believe that the sediment trucks that are going to be required, some years it won't be a lot, some years it might be more. We haven't quantified that yet. Again, in a future meeting, we'll help quantify the sediment issues once we have the calculations better refined. So I was thinking that we would keep these roads in the north area here rather than getting out on Highway 160 with the sediment trucks. Now, the roads that are being used further south, we haven't made that determination yet. And it depends on when we get into using intake 5, well, then this road here would go away and the road down to intake 5 would come into play.
Okay, so when you say sediment trucks, you're not talking about trucks that are used during construction for the shaft. You're talking about maintenance trucks that are hauling muck out of the
It'll be dried.
The four
it'll be
bays.
dried sediment from the sediment basins.
And so you don't know how much that's going to be because you still haven't done all the calcs on that.
Well, the DWR is modeling how the project will function, so we don't know how much water is running through the project yet.
Okay, so just to be sort of Reader Digest kind of approach to this, once the project's built, there's still going to be a lot of trucks running on the roads.
In the summertime, removing sediment, there'll be some years it won't be very many. It depends on the sediment year. In the river is a lot worse some years than others, right?
No, I know you're trying to be accurate, but I'm just trying to make the point that
yes, there will be
once the
trucks.
construction's done, that doesn't mean the truck traffic is finished. That's my
Correct.
point. Okay, thanks.
I would assume that with the haul truck for the maintenance, I would think, but I may be wrong, that it would be a lot less than what happens during construction. Is that correct or not?
I would say, you're getting way ahead of my ability to really answer you.
Never mind.
So I would appreciate if we could do this
We'll
at a
hold
future
that.
meeting when we
We'll
have
hold
the
that.
data, because otherwise I might just get everybody excited about something that doesn't turn
Sure.
out to be as big a deal as.
Mike, did you have a question?
It was covered by that, thanks.
Okay, great.
I was just wondering where your launch shaft is when you're building this?
We'll get to the launch shafts. These are, on the intakes would the intake 3 would be a maintenance shaft, and intake 2 would be a reception shaft. The machine only comes out. We're not driving from the intakes anymore. That was in the old project.
So again, just a reminder, what we're doing is looking at a conceptual these are concepts. And instead of giving you a blank canvas, we are providing you with a couple conceptual designs with some thoughts based on existing constraints. And so that's the kind of feedback that we want. We are limited in terms of data at this point, so it probably would be a good thing to kind of continue to flow through, and then maybe we can even flip through again and ask questions about specific slides if that's helpful. That way, you can perhaps your question can be answered on 2 slides ahead.
David, can I just remind you to speak into the mic to make sure we capture in the meeting minutes, all of you actually, because that helps us to make sure everybody's comments are captured accurately. Thanks. Right.
Okay, so moving ahead, I was just about to go past the Lambert, so now we're going to go do the same thing, except we're going to start with intakes 3 and 5, if that turns out to be the option that's selected. So this is it's the same road coming in and the same consolidation center out at Hood Franklin Road, except for the road going north would only feed intake 3, and then there'd be roads south. Some of this is, there's more than one road shown. I don't know that we'll all have all these roads in the end because we're still in the process of evaluating this, but this is for access to intake 5 from the south, and this is from the north, or for passing through stuff from the tunnel site that comes all the way up. But again, that's a new road at the base of the levee, the old railroad levee, and you can see the tunnel. So then moving down to the next site.
I'm going to every now and then interrupt. So one of the things that would be helpful to hear from is we're thinking of putting these, what we call the support site there. And what that does is employee parking. It prevents all the employees from going and driving into the intake sites. So they park there and there's just an electric bus that takes them there. So we're trying to peel traffic off the roads. The same with deliveries. What you can do is you can have the deliveries come there, and then as the road's clear, when people aren't driving their kids to school or something like that, then you can time your deliveries to the site so that the deliveries coming to the sites don't have to worry about those windows. They can just get it there, and then we can use the site-specific conditions to come in. So these are the kinds of ideas that we're putting in here to help reduce some of the effects. Now, at the same time, that creates a footprint over there in a new facility. But those are the kinds of things where feedback from you all would be extremely helpful.
Now?
Now, it's recorded in the minutes as long as you're speaking into the mic.
Okay, so there is a temporary construction site at the corner of Hood, Franklin, and I-5 now, in that same location. And I don't know I think it must be Caltrans.
Okay.
But it's still, that's a heavily traveled road still, I'm just telling you. I mean, it's everybody's way into Elk Grove from Cortland and Hood and all over, so.
Okay.
Anna, I think Anna had her hand up, and then Mike.
Can you hear me? I have a suggestion. So instead of prioritizing and giving the construction their own lane and their own elevated prioritization, you should prioritize a lane for the people that live here and the people that need to move their farm equipment, and prioritize the timing so that it is advantageous for the people that exist here, and you guys take the leftover. I mean, I don't know, 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. or whatever, the times where it's going to have the least amount of impact. It's very problematic when you're talking about this project, and it's an assumption that you have the priority, when in reality, we should have the priority, and you should be on the other flip end and be looking for times where you can do what you need to do without causing the greatest impact to us.
Along those lines, is there any thought to having 2 roads in that could be alternated?
That's the idea of having Lambert and...
So they'll both be, and so
Yeah.
but would they be just having the traffic on each road every day, or do you have a Lambert day and a Hood Franklin day?
Well, I think we would look at some of the things like Anna mentioned, times of day and all that, might be better to come in, hop on the freeway, run down to a new interchange at Lambert and go in on a different road.
Okay.
Especially depends if we use intake 5, Lambert's a lot more convenient to it. So.
Okay, thank
And
you.
we could even divide by intake as well if we pick 3 and 5.
Great. I'm just thinking about minimizing impact or showing that there is a lighter day and a heavier day so that local folks can make a choice on which way to
Sure,
go.
that's good input too.
And ultimately, the goal is to minimize impacts to the community, correct? So that's the point. Okay, Angelica.
Has there been any investigation as to extending Elk Grove Boulevard and not using Hood Franklin Road?
There was an analysis done. To be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure the name of the road. But
It's not a thorough,
but I believe it goes through the Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, and that's not allowed. We did look, there's another road back there that we absolutely looked at. It comes out near intake 2. I'm not sure if it's Elk Grove or not. Is that Elk Grove?
It's the one that goes through Stone Lakes,
Yeah. That
Okay.
was.
And when you say not allowed, I mean, whether or not it's allowed, we wanted to not do that. That was
Okay, are there other questions related to this?
We haven't even started.
We haven't even started this. All right, go ahead.
So this, as you recall, we did a launch site siting analysis, and this was the site we have settled on, primarily because of the access right at I-5. So most of the traffic can be confined. I mean, obviously there's a little bit of impact to Twin Cities Road and Franklin and Dearson in this area, but compared to some of the other choices, it was less impact moving in off the freeway. So we have the main site where we're going to have where the segments are delivered, and concrete will be batched, and employees will park, and we'll bring the RTM material over there. The shaft site is over across the freeway. One of the biggest advantages to this is we can make the bulk of our bulk deliveries by rail to this site. With the Union Pacific Railroad tracks that run right up through here, developing essentially what they call a depot for rail deliveries of the bulk materials. So this is the main area here you see for all that activity that goes on at a launch site. Remember, we told you they were in the neighborhood of upwards of up to 400 acres. And this is a drive site. This is also another advantage depending on the route. Now this is the central, so this is a drive just to the north at this particular site. But it turns out we picked the same site when we get to east, so you'll.
And how many acres is that area, and the RTM or muck storage, how many acres is that, and what's the timeline for that storage? Is it a long-term storage? Is this the drying process? When will that RTM storage land be relinquished from this project and allowed to go back into production if they can? So the total acreage, length of storage, and plans for that.
So the drive site itself is on the order of 20-ish acres. Graham helped me here. The RTM is how many acres?
So the size of these areas, the one that's labeled RTM storage is about 200 acres. The area to the south of Dearson is more along the lines of 300 acres. In terms of the duration you're asking, I think that depends on the ultimate decisions regarding reuse of RTM and how it could potentially be beneficially reused.
I'm going to show you a duration series of slides ticking through by year. So whenever this shaft is active on that, this RTM will also be active. Okay. Now what we ultimately do with the RTM will judge how quickly it can it goes back as an RTM storage area, or if we ultimately move it somewhere else, then but that hasn't been decided.
Gil,
And it's a conveyor belt going from the shaft to the
Yes,
RTM?
yes, that's a good point. There'll be conveyors taking materials across to the RTM storage.
all right. And, hold,
David, speak closer into your mic.
I don't think it was on. I was, okay. I was just asking the question if it was a conveyor belt going from the launch shaft to the RTM storage area, and he said it was.
and Gil, I believe you were next.
The east side of that RTM storage and staging area, there's no levee there, and that floods quite a bit. It's called the Franklin Pond. Are you guys going to build a levee? Because right now, that Glanville Reclamation District kind of relies on that as a levee at the railroad embankment, and it's really not a levee. It leaks like a sieve when the water comes up on it. Are you going to rebuild the levee?
Yeah, we understand the railroads. We aren't planning to touch that part, but Graham, why don't you talk about?
So Gil, we are familiar. We're working on it to understand the issue. I'm sure you're very familiar. But we also understand that it's a complex mechanism. There's not an upstream levee to really block that flow. It flanks around the top of the Consumnes River levees. So at least for this stage, what we're working on is a perimeter berm to make sure that RTM stays contained and isn't able to travel during a flood or an inundation in the area. But we're still working on the details of that and do intend to coordinate with the Reclamation District and any others who would have interest. But that would be the plan, to surround that site with a low berm that would be associated just with the consolidation center.
Oh, sorry. Do I need to go back?
Do you have a sense for how high the RTM storage will be, the elevation increase? And the reason I'm asking is that airport there would have Part 77 airspace restrictions for penetration. So just curious as to how high those levees might be, because you'd be surprised how far out that airspace restriction goes.
Right. So the perimeter levees themselves would be probably on the order of 10 feet at the tallest, but the height of RTM storage would depend on the size of the conveyance project. So the larger or smaller the tunnel will affect the size of the stockpile that is generated via the RTM. So at this point, we're not sure exactly how tall it will be. We've estimated space in here could be as high as 20 feet if we were doing maximum production and keeping it contained within the storage area. And you're right, we definitely need to account for the FAA restrictions for takeoff and landing and orientations and all of that. So good point.
Okay, so moving south from the launch site is the next is a maintenance shaft at the New Hope tract. So this is, again, to refresh everybody's memory, maintenance shaft. The TBM comes in, gets checked out, it's like going to the doctor for the TBM. They check out all the things and maybe do some replacement of some parts or some other maintenance that can only be done when you can get at the face. This is an important feature of the tunneling project for these long drives, is to make sure you've got a really robust TBM coming out of the maintenance areas. So they're relatively small sites. It depends on their elevation and a few things, exactly how many acres, but they're in the 10, I think the biggest ones are close to 20, but they're in the 10-ish, most of them are in the 10 to 15-ish acres. And you can see that, to get to this one, because this is the central corridor, you see this improvements on Walnut Grove Road, and that's on here because of the next shaft, because we have to get onto Staten Island. The main is a few road, improving a road, and a new haul road at the very end to reach the site.
So what is the reason that you need to extend the road from Vale Road to the river?
It's going to Staten Island for the next shaft, and I'll show you that in a minute. So, like I said, the next view is we go down to Staten Island for the next maintenance shaft. And again, this is Walnut Grove. We don't show the one up to the maintenance shaft on here, but this is the same issue. Now, we're going to use the existing bridge. The existing bridge is in good shape and it has the capacity, because developing these maintenance shafts is a relatively, I mean, at the time they're doing it, there'll be a fair number of trucks that have to get out there. But this isn't, you know, zillions of trucks a day for years. This is a relatively, you know, compared to the, I mean, it's a big project, but compared to the overall project, it's a lower level of activity. So the existing bridge is expected to be suitable. We're going to do road improvements. It's mainly overlays for the pavement, all the way down Staten Island. Also, the portions of Staten Island Road that are dirt will be paved to minimize dust generation and that kind of thing. So you can see where the shaft is, the maintenance shaft is located on Staten Island. Okay, so then the next stop is another one of the big sites. This is the Bolden Island launch shaft. It's a fairly big complex. The concept here, like we mentioned in our siting studies, we really want to have two modes of transport to all these launch sites. So this is a launch site that has been, the island has been evaluated quite a bit, and this launch site has been chosen mainly because of the geotechnical issues on Bolden Island. But you can see we have a new barge landing right inside Potato Slough there. That's where the segments and some of the bulk deliveries will come by barge. It's really close to the San Joaquin Deepwater Ship Channel, Stockton's Deepwater Ship Channel. So it's a pretty, industrial ship channel already, other than the last little stretch into there. Then we're also going to build a new interchange on Highway 12 to minimize the disruption of trucks trying to get off Highway 12 onto the island. Going to do some improvements to the bridge over Little Potato Slough and road widening and resurfacing clear back to the freeway, including a little bit of work on the off-ramps on Highway 12 at the freeway. Graham, this is another spot you might want to comment on the levees.
Yeah, you will see the note down in the corner that we're working on determining existing or improvements to the existing levees for these drive sites. We will be at those sites for several years, and it does seem appropriate to look at improving those existing levees as a risk reduction measure. So we're in the process of working through that.
Rather than the ring levy concept.
Rather than the ring levy concept, correct.
Considering the levy work for Bolden, or are you also considering levy work for islands that are directly across from them? We're in it's all a system, it's all interconnected, right? So when you improve one area and you don't improve another, you can put that other area at risk. So is that part of your process? And then on Staten, how many acres is that? Sorry to ask that.
So all those maintenance shafts are in the 10 to 20, depending on their elevation. Most of them are in the 10 to 15.
Great, thank you. And the acreage of this RTM storage site, how many acres is that?
This is a dual drive. Do you know the acreage?
I think it's about 250 or so acres. And regarding your first question, risk transfer will certainly be part of the analysis and evaluation going forward. But at the moment, we're just understanding the conditions of the Bolden Island levees and evaluating the potential impacts on the tunnel drive site.
And are you working with the reclamation districts to make sure that you have like great data and, experience and all of that, the goodness of what reclamation districts bring to you?
We are.
Great.
Okay, so then moving south from Bolden Island, the next shaft down is the Mandeville maintenance this slide is sort of an overview, which actually shows the Bacon Island reception shaft coming from Bolden Island. We're going to receive the TBM here and the Mandeville reception shaft. It's because these are relatively hard to access islands. So this slide shows the whole system for how we're going to make the access there. So we can come off Highway 4, have to put a bridge over the McCalmy aqueducts and the railroad. Then we're going to improve the road that's along the railroad and the McCalmy aqueducts. And then we'll put in a new bridge to get onto Bacon Island because the bridge that's there and the configuration, I won't be able to handle the traffic. And then a new road in the interior of Bacon Island rather than driving on the levee road with access to the reception shaft, and then continuing on up the island with a new bridge onto Mandeville Island for the same reasons, and then a road through Mandeville Island up to the shaft site.
Should be a maintenance shaft up there.
Oh yeah, it is. You're right.
It's
It
not
is
a
maintenance
reception shaft. Missed it.
Bolden Island launch shaft real quick. And just want to look at that barge site. I'm losing it here. So in the RTM storage, once that's dried, settled, studied, and ready for movement, if that RTM moves, would that barge site be used for that?
It could be. We haven't determined whether what this RPM is going to be used for, but if it's going to be used to be moved around, then certainly it could be brought to that barge landing. Matter of fact, that would be the best way to get it off that island.
Okay, thank you.
What is your sequence of workflow on those shafts? I mean, from north to south or
I'm going to go over that in painful detail here in a few minutes.
Are these bridges permanent or temporary?
They would be permanent. The idea is they'd be permanent. I suppose that if people were really against it, they could be. But the state is going to need to be able to access these shafts with some kind of vehicle. So there's going to have to be something left. I don't know how robust they'd have to be.
So is there, I guess you've got the barge site on the south side of Bolden. I guess that's just more barge accessible than on the north side?
Yes, that's a simple answer. It is.
Because it'd be closer to 12 if it was up on the up on the north side.
Yeah, that's true, but I'm not sure the barge landing, we really would prefer it to be closer to the shaft than the highway.
It looks like it's 50-50 right there.
The other thing...
Hey, Phil, you phone a friend here.
Yeah. Just having access from the barge to the shaft site would avoid having to cross over Highway 12 because the barge site would be used for major material offloading and loading, and so we'd actually want to avoid having to cross 12.
Barging up the McCalmy is going to be much more challenging as well. And I think it's much more disruptive to the people in the marina down there as well.
So one thing to look at in the location of that barge site is that is a very popular area for boaters on the weekends. They actually call that series of little islands that are really hard to see in there called the bedrooms. So there'll be a lot of boats out there every weekend and people stay in there. So if you see where, I mean, you've got it coming down and going a little to the left. I mean, when it comes time to really site that, there might be worth everybody going out there and seeing what's out there and maybe getting a few people that recreate in that area to chime in too.
What if there was a restriction for not barging on weekends?
Oh, sure, that would be helpful, yeah.
Yeah. How does it look during the week in the summer, Monday to Friday?
Depends on whether the, Tiburon Yacht Club is up there or not, it's.
Okay. Did you have something to add, Peter?
Yeah.
You want to borrow the mic?
The bedrooms are a cornerstone event for boaters on the Delta, and it gets pretty packed frequently. And if you have any kind of a extra weekend, Monday off, Friday off, or whatever thing going on in there, it really does pack up. The North Delta people like to come down and go there, and the folks from the Bay want to come in and get warm. So yeah, it gets a lot of use.
Great, thank you.
And there's actually some commercial interest there. I mean, people will go there and they'll be heading over to the restaurants and everything in the morning in the area. And, you know, there could be an aesthetics view to this too. I mean, they're there at that location because it's very natural. And if you just plop a big barge landing in there, there's, you know, everybody should be aware of all those things.
Just if that was a site that was potentially considered for the reclamation districts, and Gil, I guess I'm maybe looking at you a little bit, if this was a site where reclamation districts could pick up the excess material to use for their own needs, that would have the same issues around BART, you'd want it during the weekdays, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
That the budget, when the barges move to move through like Warner Grove area, the Paintersville Bridge, the Warner Grove Bridge. I mean, when the bridge have to open up nowadays, it's a lot of traffic being held up. So I think barges is very disruptive.
Yeah, we've been pretty careful about where we put barges. So I don't think we have barge routes that cross any bridges right now. But anyway, we'll keep going through it. There's only two, so.
One more thing before we leave that is you might consider actually, it looks as though you could get that landing right out on the San Joaquin if you just keep going, whatever that is, west there. And
So one of the things that I have been considering is that we are expecting that we will need to incorporate some habitat mitigation efforts as part of this project, and doing that near an area where RTM is generated would be helpful for us as part of that mitigation. So we had been hoping that we could leave that corner on the San Joaquin open because that would be a really good place for habitat restoration. So that was part of the reason to avoid it for a barge landing.
there's a lot of habitat restoration going on in Frank's Track, right? With a couple of thousand acres, I believe.
Mitigation for our project. So our project, because of the effects that we will have to incorporate additional mitigation. Some of that will likely need to be different. There will need to be different types, we expect, and some of those will be hard to obtain other places. So we can't use other efforts that are going on in other places for other purposes to count as our mitigation. We need to mitigate for our project as part of our effort.
So I understand that technically, I'm sure you're correct in stating that most of the people will associate the two. I mean, those projects are going on in a parallel manner, so they'll be looking at them together.
Jim.
Thinking about the bridges, which are one of my favorite parts of the Delta, when you talk about upgrades to the bridges, so if it's a historic bridge, how do you keep its historic value and upgrade it to a 2020 level? And who's going to be involved in that process of deciding which bridge is going to receive an update, and if it's going to be a historic update versus, are you going to invite stakeholders from the community to have input on that, or how will that work?
That's not an engineering thing, so I'll turn it over to.
Yeah. I think that's something we'll evaluate under the CEQA process.
Okay, thank you.
And then Jim.
Okay, Jim.
Just to clarify too, is the infrastructure on Bolden Island and the sort of aggressive infrastructure, if you will, does that have anything to do with who owns the island?
I'm sorry.
Does it have anything to do with who owns Bolden Island?
Well, not really, because it's about the spacing. So when you're at 10 to 15 miles and you're trying to keep a launch shaft off of Staten Island because of the access, Bolden Island is right along Highway 12, so, and there, it is along the San Joaquin Deep River Ship Canal. So when we were looking at the criteria for launch shafts, because those are the major centers around construction of the tunnel project, it had some features to it that made it suitable. If you look a little bit south of there and a little bit north of there, you don't find an island that has those kinds of features. So it wasn't, we looked
Yeah,
at this with a clean set of eyes, Jim.
The island immediately to the south, I forget the name of it, is completely inaccessible.
Yeah, Venice Island, yeah.
Hey, Phil, how are we doing on time?
Not really sure. We got a long ways to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if everybody would,
I think we can get through, if we could get through this in the schedule and then move on to the East Quarter, take a break in between Central and East, that'd be great.
Okay.
But I think this has been a really great conversation.
So again, this is a blow up on Mandeville then. I kind of cheated ahead. It's the same thing we just saw with a little bit more detail. And the same for Bacon, where the new bridge would be, we're showing it in the same place as the existing bridge. If that existing bridge is determined to be historic, we don't have to put this bridge in the exact same spot. As a matter of fact, we probably wouldn't to leave it open while we're building a new one. So that's why I say some of this stuff's conceptual. As we detail it more, it'll be more defined.
Can I ask a question? When you say new bridges, are they built to a certain height specification for boaters? I mean, there's going to be an advantage if boaters aren't waiting for these little bridges all the time.
Right.
These would be, yeah, these aren't going to be, these would be bridges that everybody can get over and you'll be able to pass under.
The construction trucks won't want to wait for
They
them
don't want to wait either. Okay, so now we're moving a little bit closer to the very south end. This is the last maintenance shaft. It's the Byron Track maintenance shaft. As you can see, it's adjacent to Discovery Bay there. Again, it's simply a maintenance shaft where some work would be done on the TBM as it approaches there to the time required to build the shaft. But it's not a major work site compared to the others. And there's a new road coming up there from Highway 4. And because the frequency of the traffic isn't as much, it doesn't need a sophisticated interchange. Probably have some turn pockets and that kind of thing. And then you can see this Hull Road there. It's actually, again, sorry, it's another typo. That's a new access road. That's going to be one of the access roads to the southern complex, which we'll see in a minute here. So now we got the southern forebay facilities, and this is the area that Catherine said the next time we come to you, we're going to go over this site in pretty painful detail. Some of this stuff gets a little better as we go by because we're developing this work. This area is a little bit more developed in our work, so we've got some nice graphics and stuff for next week. But essentially, where the tunnel terminates at the pump station at the north end of the southern forebay. And the southern forebay site was selected from looking at a bunch of sites in the area. Again, we'll go over that with you at the next meeting. The tunnels terminate in a shaft that either can overflow under certain conditions. Normally, though, it would feed into the pump station, and the pump stations would lift the flow into the reservoir, and then it would flow through another series of tunnels over to connect into the canal that feeds the state pumps. So there's a drive shaft here. So this is a launch site for the tunnel. And you can see a bunch of the area. This is obviously a large site because we got to build the forebay is roughly 750 acres of water surface. So this is a very large site. And some of the spoil storage from either the forebay construction, we're intending to use the RTM to build the embankments for the reservoir here, so all the RTM processing and managing will be inside the footprint of the reservoir. And then this is like segment storage to feed the tunnel drive. And down in this area, we would also have the same sort of thing for feeding the southern tunnel drive, and then it'd be the outlet that feeds. And this is a double tunnel because that capacity, the project's capacity is to deliver water to the southern forebay. From south of the southern forebay, we have to match the capacity of the state pumps. which is about 10,500 CFS. So in this area, there's a lot going on. We're intending to bring rail in off the existing UP line to bring RTM from up north, because we don't generate enough here to build the whole 4-bay embankment. So we're going to pick it up at Glanville, where the railroad is, and swing it around down to this site. We're also, because of that railroad configuration and how it crosses the Byron Highway now, and the fact that the state is looking at developing, I believe it's State Highway 239 down here, we're consolidating our development of this area with what they're planning to do and to accommodate the railroad. So the railroad comes up into the site. There's several sidings for how to load and unload segments and RTM. The Byron Highway is essentially going to follow that path there now, and we would use some of the old highway bed as an access road into the site and come off the existing highway, especially early in the project. And then we would obviously have to have a bridge to clear the railroad for the site. And then there's a road coming in this area. This is relatively unpopulated right in here, to the facility that connects to the existing Banks channel there. And there's a control structure to control, so we can run from both projects.
My first question is, if there's historic railroads, would you build a parallel railroad next to it? And because my understanding is you can't disturb historic railroad spurs or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
And then my second question is, if you find out that your technical report is correct and you can't reuse this material, one, what would you do with it? But two, how would you supplement for what you need here? And three, is there any plan to upgrade the aqueduct that actually connects with this, that is subsiding and is at very heavy earthquake risk and not enclosed and losing 30% of its evap every day that water runs in it? So is there any plans as part of this plan to correct that so that we're not building a multi-million-dollar plumbing system and then putting it in a sieve?
So the first question, as far as I know, we're not adjacent to any historic railroads. So
You are at Franklin.
yeah, but we're not on the railroad bed. We're off to the side.
Okay, so you don't intend to interfere
No, we're
with
not going to
historic-
use the old railroad bed.
Great.
And this railroad, I'm pretty sure, is not historic, I think. I'm going to skip to your third question, which was about the California aqueduct downstream. I believe that's a separate state action. So I don't know if is that good enough?
Yeah, in general, the state is working on looking at infrastructure throughout the entire state water project and identifying necessary improvements.
So it's not part of this
We should
project.
start
And then you had one in the middle, and I forgot what it was. That's why I skipped.
What to do if you've discovered that your technical report is correct and you cannot reuse this recycled tunnel material, also known as muck. What will you do with it? What happens to it? Which is a major question that's asked. And then where will you get materials to use in place of it?
So I believe you're referring to the ITR report, and
Graham studied that, right?
yeah, we've studied this in detail. Those gentlemen did not have the opportunity to study that whole situation in detail, and we have, and other people have. So
There was also a follow-up presentation to the DCA board where the ITR representative who was leading that effort also acknowledged that for these purposes, he could see potential application. He was referring to specific structural fill in that documentation, but I think with some of the follow-up understanding and what was being intended for the project, he was starting to contemplate that it could potentially be reused. But I'm confident that it can be reused. I think from a geotechnical perspective, the material does meet specification. So we have looked at that, and we'll be doing a lot more evaluation of that material to determine if it does in fact meet all of the requirements for embankment fill. But based on the effort that has been performed to date, it does appear to meet all of the necessary geotechnical requirements. There's some additional study going on about the material, some of the metals contents and other effects of the conditioners that will be used in the tunneling operation to make sure that it is truly appropriate. But my personal opinion is that, yeah, it's going to be reusable. That's the direction we're heading. We'll just have to keep vetting that out.
And of course, we'll have like a third-party verification so that the public knows that it's not just DWR's sole decision, and it's an actual decision based upon the realities of science or the realities of research. I find it troubling that all of a sudden now they've taken a 360 and said, well, they can consider it when their job in that technical report was to consider it. But I digress.
We will have documents to support our conclusions when we complete the geotechnical work.
Great.
Philip actually had his hand up, so if we could do that, and then.
Just curious, so the area that's portrayed here, especially the upper box where the southern forebay is, the spoils, yeah. That area is really good evidence in Spanish and Anglo sources from the early 19th century. It was really densely populated with Delta Yokuts peoples. What types of archaeological studies are going to take place?
So that's primarily through the CEQA process, and so
Okay.
we are doing AB 52 consultation, and as well as consulting under DWR's tribal policies with tribes that may not be listed under AB 52. So we are doing a pretty extensive outreach process to try to get as much information as we can.
It was David and then Jim. Oh, Peter.
If I can go back to the barges real quick. Now, the work is only going to be a 5-day double shift, is what's on the books, and you're not going to be moving barges and other commercial vessels on the weekends?
I believe that's the plan.
We can make that restriction. These are the kinds of comments that we would like to hear from you.
Yeah, really consider that, if you would. Thank you.
Okay. David and then Jim.
Oh, and just to be clear, we were proposing 5 days a week of tunneling, 1 day of maintenance. That's a very light day. And then Sunday, not working. So just to be clear, there is some work on Saturdays. It's just not tunnel boring. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I won't be around at the next meeting when you're going into details on the southern forebay. But I do have a concept that I'd like to throw out there, and I did make a comment in the CEQA comments about it. And it's regarding, there's a problem in the South Delta with algae in the summertime. And I'm looking to see whether there can be some plumbing in this so that actually there could be a mitigation use against, bad water and algae in the South Delta at certain times of the year by being able to take some of this water and flush it back into the Delta if there's a challenge there.
We've talked about this at a prior meeting, and that's something that we can think about as we hit mitigation, but
Great.
we're not quite there yet.
Jim. And then Sean.
So the southern forebay is an above-ground facility, right? You're not digging a hole in it, right? So obviously, I just want to know how tall is the levee that's going to create the forebay?
You're right, it is above ground. The top elevation that we're looking at right now is elevation 28. So by comparison, Clifton Court has a reservoir rim of about elevation 15. So that's for that comparison. In terms of natural ground surfaces in that area, they range from a minimum of about -8 along the eastern side of the forebay up to about 0 or +2 on the western side of the forebay. Oh, sorry, actually quite a bit higher than that. My mistake. It's the embankment height is about 15 feet on the western side, so take 28 minus 15.
Okay. So it's subject to division of mines, dam safety rather, right?
It would be a DSOD jurisdictional facility.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
At the end of the presentation, can you go back to intakes 2 and 3 in the area near Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge? The new haul roads? This would have been one of the earlier slides.
One of the first slides.
Just type 1 and hit return. Yeah, they can do it faster than I can. All the way up. 2 and 3?
Yeah, intakes 2 and 3. I think it was the very first pictorial slide that you had.
One up.
There you go.
That one.
Thanks.
So the Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge is one of the most threatened national wildlife refuges in the entire country. And part of that is constrained by urban development to the east and to the north. Putting these haul roads in, as you have it configured, is going to now add impacts to the west and the south, further threatening this really important area for sensitive species. So in terms of terrestrial species, not a good thing at all. And then jumping down to the Staten Island map. Which I'm running to here. The maintenance shaft that you guys have depicted, if you look at it, it's in a bit of a pinch point to the east of Staten Island Road. That area has been a very successful roost site for sandhill cranes over a great number of years. Sandhill cranes require very long sight lines in order to consider using a roost site. You're going to be much better off finding a spot for that where the island's a lot wider. Essentially, you're saying we're no longer going to have this available for a roost site, which is unfortunate because a lot of the cranes use Tyler Island, so it's a very good placement for a roosting pond.
So Sean,
yes?
Where on the map would you say would be a great spot for it? Because these maintenance shafts are pretty flexible
Yeah,
where
like
they
it's
go.
wider
The
here.
further south, the wider, but you're not really on the tunnel quite as well. The further
No, we
south, the
can,
better.
we would move the tunnel to that shaft.
South.
Absolutely.
The-
So
the
further
island widens-
south and
the
further
island widens
west?
out to the south.
It widens out more than here.
Yeah, well, more than the. I think it's wider.
Well,
I think it's wider in the south. Yep, I think it's quite a bit wider in the
Do we
south.
have one that?
Go one slide before.
Yeah.
You got the island footprint there.
Yeah, you look to the south. I think
Oh,
it's the
I
widest
see
spot.
what you're saying, the map.
See how
Yeah,
wide it
all right.
gets?
You mean down in this area?
Yeah,
The really wide area here is a little too close to the drive shaft, but you can definitely look at it.
And then getting further off the road, maybe, because we were trying to go along the corridor of the road to minimize adding new roads on there, but if adding a new haul road a little bit to clear that main road through there into a better spot, that's perfectly. I mean, this is actually one of the reasons you're on this board, is to help us with this here.
yeah, we can talk about it further, but further south, the island's wider, it's significantly better. It's not going to have as much impact on the ability to do roost sites there long-term. That northern end of the island tends to be a flood zone to create roost sites because it's so close to Tyler Island, which is a very good foraging area for the cranes. So we should talk about it probably in some greater detail.
Great.
What kind of studies have been done to ensure that the noise, vibration, whatever off-put from the tunnel boring won't affect the cranes? Has anyone ever actually studied that? How do we know that they'll stay?
Last iteration.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I would request that we study to make sure. I mean, this is a highlight of the Delta. I personally have brought my children down there and people down there to Staten Island to observe these cranes and count them, and a lot of effort and a lot of time is being put in to make sure that their habitat is being maintained. And I know personally that vibrations and sound can negatively affect animals. Today, my chickens had a total nightmare because the guy next door was doing a ditch. So I can't imagine, they're birds, right? So I think that we should ask formally to study that to make sure we're not going to be driving off the very species that we've worked so hard to create habitat for.
So that's something we'll look at as part of the CEQA process, but if people want to submit additional CEQA comments on it, that would be great.
Great. Jesus.
Mine's kind of more like a comment, and I apologize if I come off a little disturbed, I guess, but, listening, I appreciate, Philip, I appreciate your words about the yoke cuts that are down in that area. Definitely appreciate your words about our winged brothers and sisters, whether we walk on 2 or 4 legs. But it just disturbs me a little bit to be here, and when we're talking about the winged brothers and sisters, that we're going to so easily consider something else when we've already brought up the intakes, and those are sacred religious sites for our people, my people. And so it just disturbs me a little bit that we're so quick to say, well, I'll look into this, or maybe we can move this here, where we're already telling you that those 3 intakes are all very highly sensitive. And I know we talk about the AB 52 process, but we're still waiting for responses on that. And so, I appreciate being here, and I'm happy to be here, but it's very hard to sit here. When we talk about things as, boating and fishing, and I know that's the way of the life here, but we seem to be more in tune with that than the indigenous people that were here. And we reflect those people that are here as well, that have come into our land, right? But again, as I said before, that, from my tribe, the Miwok and Nisenan people, we still consider ourselves the stewards of this place and this land with the people that are sitting here at this table. So I would just hope, we hear a little bit more from maybe DWR about that AB 52 consultation, because it hurts me to have to sit here, and we're so quick to want to jump on nature, which I appreciate. But even the Stone Lakes thing, right? Would we put a road through there? Probably not, because you can't, right? So I don't understand, why we're not getting what we need to fight for our rights as well, for that wildlife and for everything that's in that delta. So I just wanted to make sure that, that's expressed, and I hope I did it the best way that I could. But it's very hurtful for me, and because, it's just a hurtful thing. And so I would hope that we maybe move a little bit faster to respond to the tribes that are asking that information. Thank you.
And just to add to that, we are waiting for our AB 52 meeting. We obviously have huge concerns with where the intakes are going, with the roads and the new halls. Those are all very, very important issues that we have, that we're just waiting for our meeting so that we can address some of those. And thank you, Mr. Taringo. This project is painful to watch. And thank you for bringing up the birds. The birds mean a lot to us. The biggest equestrian on the West Coast, and you want to put a 40-mile tunnel through it? It's really painful to watch. The intakes, it's so significant where you're putting them. We can't understand why that was even an option, because you wouldn't go through somebody else's cemetery. You wouldn't. So besides the pipeline, there's all these other factors that we're just wondering why it hasn't been considered. The northern tribes, they've been having this fight. We need our salmon back. Nobody's talking about salmon. Nobody's talking about the animals. We have a direct relationship with them. We have a direct relationship with the land. We have a direct relationship with the water. So we're waiting for our meeting. We have a lot of concerns. Thank you.
Okay, moving on, for the central corridor, in order to construct what I showed you in the site plans previously, there's a whole series of construction projects. The tunnel's shown on here, but while it's a construction project, it's 150 feet in the ground, so you don't see it quite so much.
Yeah, so we're going to try to go through this really quickly so we can get to break. But basically what he's going to show you is every project that was on the previous pages that you just saw are up on this map. And then he's going to go through the 16-year construction period and show what the sites for active construction are year by year. Okay, so that you get a sense. You guys were, you gave us feedback at the last meeting that you wanted to understand holistically what's going on throughout the Delta year to year. So what we're going to do is year by year turn on projects, and then as they complete, turn them off. So obviously, logistics will turn on early, and then it'll turn off once those logistics projects are done, and some of the larger feature sites will start turning on. And then what we'll do, what we've put in there is just to kind of represent the volume of traffic using a light yellow and then a light orange and an oranger color to show density of truck traffic, and put hubs on there at each of these sites. So hopefully this is, we're trying to find a kind of a very user-friendly way of describing the construction schedule year to year. So you can track how long a certain site is active in construction from the time that it turns on to the time that it turns off. And each year is recorded at the top. So just so a little context. So Phil's going to flip through this for the 16 years, but there shouldn't be anything on these drawings that you didn't see on those site maps in terms of projects that are needed in order to complete the Delta Conveyance program. Oh, does that make sense? Okay.
The only thing I'd add is like some of these roads, what we're showing is the construction project, not the use of those roads. So it's when there's active construction and a lot of trucks to build that project. For instance, these access roads for the intakes, we're only going to show them when they're being constructed. But while the intakes are on, we were obviously using them as well. Okay, so year one, we'd start off with, again, some of the early works to get access to the sites up at the intakes area in Hood Franklin Road, the main drive site at the Glanville facility, the Bolden Island facilities, and some of the stuff to get access and rearrange traffic down in the South Delta. That's all relatively light traffic. They're sophisticated projects, so they go on for quite a long time in the, like the whole year, so the traffic's spread out over a whole year. So then you go to the second year, and you notice that some of them fell off. So we finished developing, say, Hood Franklin Road and a portion of this area, but we're adding in now some of the haul roads are in year two. This project's still going on. We're building the barge landing and more of the facilities like the rail spur down in the South Delta. And again, that's similar traffic loads because they're longer term projects. So then as you get into year three, you can see now we're starting to build a launch shaft for some of the longer drives. So you can see that the launch shaft at Glanville is going in because that's the longest drive to the north. Trying to think, and then we have to build a bridge because we're going to need some of these shafts. So the first bridge over the McCalmy aqueducts and the railroad that will eventually feed the road into Bacon and Mandeville. Now you can see there's a denser one for what seems like a small project. Well, our concept is to minimize the length of the impact. So some of these projects are going to be kind of fast burns. So that's not a whole year of traffic like that, but that's a fairly intense, several weeks to get in and do that overlay. So then a lot of those roads get finished. You notice we're still working on the shaft there, though, because that's going to be active for many years. And you can see that the southern shaft appears now down at the South Delta. And we're starting to complete the roads to get to some of our maintenance and other shafts. Still working on the bridge over the railroad. And again, some of these are quick burn projects, so they have higher loads. Okay, now we've started to actually tunnel at Bolden Island and at Glanville Tract and at the North Launch sites, and we've started the pump station now. It's coming into play. I may have missed when the intake started. Maybe I should. Yeah, intake 5 actually started in year 4, so, and then a year later, intake 3 starts. We're staggering some of the in-water work in the river for the intakes. Again, the intakes, especially in their second year, have a fair amount of truck traffic to them. And then some of the major launch sites start to have a fair amount of truck traffic or the equivalent of truck traffic in some of these. So now moving into year 7, again, you can see we're starting to build the south forebay now because we're generating RTM that we can pull down to the other side. And you can see the shafts are beginning to appear so that the drive can move through them. And again, the traffic, again, the intakes are some of the highest. So now year 8, the south reception shaft has appeared so that this, because there's a tunnel out of the south forebay that moves down. But what you can see here is that in years 7 and 8 there's a lot of stuff lit up. So there's a lot more, that's the peak of the activities in the heart of the schedule there. Year 9 is similar. It's mostly adding stuff in this area and a few shafts, a few of the maintenance shafts as we go. Again, the activity high in the major work sites. Now you can see some of the sites are completed, so the maintenance shafts are starting to disappear. It's not that we're not using them. We've kept the reception shafts on, though, because they're going to eventually receive the TBMs. Again, still work at the major shaft sites. Intake 5 is done now after year 9, and intake 3 is still under construction. Year 11, I missed what changed there. Can't see what changed, sorry. But as we move into year 12, you're going to start to see things falling off pretty fast. You can study these and see what changes from each year in your notebooks, too. I think the important thing is as we get towards the end, there's a fair amount of work at the tunnel shafts at the very end for lining them and moving everything and demobbing the sites. So you're going to see that as we go through years 12 and 13, the reception shafts. See, now all of a sudden we're done with everything but demobbing from the site. And you might ask, why is there 3 years left? Well, it takes one more year to completely get out of to line and get out of the two shafts at the Glanville track site. And then you'll see in year 15 and 16, all the main mechanical electrical features come back on because now we're commissioning the project. This is very light traffic, but there is a couple years of getting the whole thing to work properly, shake out the bugs, do the warranty work and that kind of thing. And then the project is completed after year 16. The schedule will be refined over time. This is the schedule that exists today. It probably won't be the final schedule. I would personally hope that we could do it in a shorter period of time.
Could we get a map that would represent operations, what you expect would be truck traffic and activity and noise at whichever locations?
When we're finished, when the project's finished? Yeah, I think that's probably something we would generate.
You're talking post-construction with the truck in okay.
Yeah, just so we have an idea of how many trucks will be visiting the sites, which sites they will visit, that kind of stuff.
Are there any other questions with regard to this time frame? Yes.
This is really great to see the layout on the construction side. Is it possible at one point to develop an overlay on this with some of the benefits, the parks and other facilities that might be developed?
We're going to start working with you guys soon on that stuff. We're getting
Yeah, because if it's 16 years, I have to wait for that. I don't know if I want to be there anymore.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's kind of the idea, to show you actually what this is a conceptual footprint right now. A lot of things might change.
Okay, so it feels like we're wrapping this corridor up. I think we're getting ready to I think it feels like this was a really good way to go in terms of getting feedback from folks. Again, taking the information that we already had, implementing it, laying it on a map, and trying to refine it by getting information from you. Well, we're going to do it all over again with the Eastern Corridor. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and
please try to, keep watch on your own time, and then I will call us together again in about 10 minutes. Maybe we'll make it 10 minutes to 5 that we'll be back in our seats.
one last thing is that we have food as we always do, but we're doing food service this time, so people will be serving you the food in order to cut down on any form of, whatever, contamination. We want to make sure that everyone's as healthy as possible, so putting that out there.
And ladies and gentlemen, we are now resuming our meeting.
Okay, so we're going to do the exact same thing through the Eastern Corridor, and I think some of this stuff is in the very north is identical. So hopefully we can skip through that part of it pretty fast. Yeah, well, and south as well, yeah.
So we should be able to get through this a lot
So,
faster.
yeah, as you've seen, I'm sure a lot of you look at the NOP materials, the corridors kind of start together, they split, and then they come back at the bottom. So the main focus of this will be show you the differences as we head down an eastern alignment. So again, the same thing starting at intake 2 and 3. It's the exact same slide. So I'm going to just sort of shoot by unless somebody has some burning question that came up while they... Again, if you use 2 and 3, you have to have the Lambert shaft. So that, as far as impacts in the area, if you pick 3 and 5, there's one less shaft, and it's a little bit further south. So that's the 3 and 5 slide we looked at before.
I'm just assuming that having one less shaft that we have to construct and use as part of this project is something that folks, particularly up in the North Delta, would find helpful. Note head nodding.
And again, the only difference with this site from the central is the tunnel comes in at a slightly different angle. Again, it's the same concept, and so I was a little bit mistaken in the first. I get confused sometimes. These are drives in both directions. That's why this is a big site. We're driving towards the intakes and towards the south, and we were on the other one as well. So the next one.
Just also, just compared to the last project, switching to drive from this location eliminated the need for all of the liners going to the intake location, so penetrating into the hood area there. It eliminates that truck traffic. It also allows all of the reusable tunnel material to be kind of concentrated in that area. And as long as we're along the rail, we now have a lot of flexibility of where we can move that material because we've now got rail access. So it's a little bit easier to wheel it around in this location. So we see this as a significant reduction in truck traffic coming off of I-5 and into the inner delta, or I hope I'm describing that right.
It also allows the intakes to be completed for the most part while the tunnel is being driven, because we just pull it out here. We don't have to have this big tunneling operation and try and build an intake around it. So again, it's still called the New Hope track, just like it was on the other one, because it's on New Hope track. I wonder if I don't think that shaft's in, I think we have a mistaken slide here. Graham, is this the right spot isn't the New Hope tracked on east in a different location?
Yeah, you're right. This is not the right location for this particular shaft site. For the eastern alignment, it is positioned further to the east.
Do you know where it is on the map?
Not exactly.
I'm sorry about that, folks. When we get the same name of it, the slide got pulled in. We'll fix that, right?
the same latitude, just closer to Highway 5, or do we, it looks like it's really close to Highway 5?
If you look in this one, the slide before in your thing, this is the right spot. That's what kind of threw me off when I looked at it.
So one comment to that, there are different preserves and areas that we're trying to avoid and set back from, and so this is a very constrained area, if you remember from the maintenance shaft siting that we looked at last time. So it may not be at the exact latitude, but it is further to the east, and I think shifted down.
Somewhere.
Yeah, shifted down a little.
Sorry, we'll get you the right one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Did somebody get that? No. Okay. So then moving down to the next shaft down is the bracket track. So this one, you'd access it off Woodbridge Road, and then you have to put a new haul road up. So we would do an overlay on Woodbridge Road for the truck traffic, and then a new haul road up to the maintenance shaft. The terminus track, this is a reception shaft, so the tunnel went in at the Glanville track, and it'll come out here, the TBM, and you're going to see as we get down, it's actually a reception shaft from both directions. The tunnel from the south is going to come out here as well. So this is right along Highway 5. Now these road improvements are different than if we were using Golden Island on Highway 12. We're going to simply do an overlay to make sure that the pavement is not damaged and that we're not going to improve the interchange. We're not going to widen the road because of the truck traffic is considerably less for a reception shaft and a maintenance shaft construction is almost identical. And then when we pull the TBM out at the end, that gets broken down and hauled away in some trucks. So there's a little bit more activity at the end, but it's not as much as the beginning. So that's why this is just road improvements, and you'll see the other one was road widening. So then as you move a little further down, we get to the King Island maintenance shaft, another maintenance shaft. We come in on 8 Mile Road, again, because of the amount of traffic, we're going to use an existing bridge that doesn't appear to need to be improved for the amount of traffic that needs to get to the site. And again, it's an overlay for the road to get there. Now we come down to the Lower Roberts Island launch shaft. This is another major site, so this is a launch shaft site. So we've been working quite a bit on this site. It's got, this is the one that has the trifecta, where we are looking at, we have the opportunity to develop road, barge, and rail. Now the likelihood is we would only pick rail or barge, and that's going to depend on conversations with the Port of Stockton and entities like that. But basically, there's an existing new entrance to Rough and Ready Island in the Port of Stockton area. You'd access it, come up, put a new road along, this is a railroad line here, new road up here, and then we'd build a couple of bridges, one for rail and one for road. And once the bridges are in, we would extend the rail out to our site, or we would extend the road out to our site. The other opportunity here is to have a barge landing in this area here along the ship channel. There's an existing very small barge landing right up in that location right there, right adjacent to our site. So we'll at least contemplate the use of that, but it's not really big enough for anything we're talking about doing, but it might be a feature that could be incorporated. So, and again, this site, as you remember from our siting studies, the area on Lower Roberts was picked due to all the proximity to this logistical access here. Oh yeah, and that's right. Graham's going to want to mention some stuff about levee integrity in this area.
Well, this site would be similar to Bolden. You see the note indicating a ring levee. That's actually incorrect. The note on here should indicate evaluation of existing levees similar to Bolden Island. That would be the approach for this launch site as well. Particularly looking around Turner Cut, so we're still working through that now, and we'll be coordinating further with the Reclamation District.
Turner Cut's off the left side of the slide over here,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
You're going to connect the new road access to Highway 5. Do you plan on just going through Rough and Ready Island, or like how will like that connect?
There's a major port access road, brand new, right in this area that we.
Oh, from Grandview.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where it goes. I'm not that familiar with it, but I know it's a.
And then it'll connect at the bottom dive?
We would connect onto it right over here, one of the roads that comes off this way and go up.
So when, it does. So when you revise these maps, could you add that so we could see how it connects to I-5 for that impact? Because
We are planning to show you an overall traffic flow. So what these maps show, Anna, is just the things we're going to build.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. I'm sure you're all interested in the actual directions we expect traffic to move. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So then continuing on, this is one of my favorite areas because it's Lower Jones Island, but it's north of Upper Jones Island, and I always think north and south. But so the next shaft is on Lower Jones Tract. It's right along the same area that we were looking at for access to Bacon and Mandeville. This is just a smaller version of that doesn't go as far. So the maintenance shaft would be, the McCallmy aqueducts, or you can see them right there, and the railroad. So we would bridge over that and then improve the road in that direction. So then the Victoria Island maintenance shaft, this is the last one headed south. It's right off Highway 4, near the Old River Bridge there. So again, a maintenance shaft where we come off a little access over the canal there. And then as we head down to the southern forebay, this again is identical to what I showed you before, other than the tunnel comes in at a different angle. So then I'm happy, before we go on to showing the schedule, jumping through all this, if anybody has any questions. I think one of the things that the east, as you can probably see in some of these, the access roads to get to them are a lot simpler. There's a lot less bridges to do work on. From a geeky engineering perspective, there's not as much peat ground because we're kind of closer to the edges of the delta, so the ground for some of the things we have to build from an engineering perspective is more stable. It is a longer route, but some of these things are trade-offs from an engineering perspective, and it's easier to get to. It's closer to I-5. Less stuff in the core of the delta, like as we talked about this barge landing on the San Joaquin River is a lot less of an imposition than the people who want to, I forget what you guys called those islands, the bedrooms, yeah. So the impacts are shifted more towards the I-5 corridor, and again, that's slightly better ground. And I think it's further away from some of the sandhill crane roosting areas and all that kind of stuff too. So now we're going to do the little schedule thing to jump through. Okay, again, all of the projects, so these were all the things I showed you on these slides. This is the whole layout for East. It's a similar layout to what we went through on Central. It's just shifted over. And remember our main drive site, we drive from Glanville up to the intakes. We just showed the intake 3-5 on this map. The options would be similar if we went to 2 or 3. Then we would drive from Glanville south to terminus. So these are maintenance, this is reception. So the drive goes from here, comes out there. This drive goes up to terminus and comes out. So that's a drive site. And then the drive down at the southern forebay comes up to this drive site and is received. The TBM comes out there. And then there's still the small, shorter double tunnel down at the southern end. So again, year one, for all practical purposes, it's identical to Central with the things we might be, but you can see like the Highway 12 improvements are much shorter and much less of a project because we're only basically overlaying it. We are beginning to work though down at the Port of Stockton because this is the major access we need to develop on the eastern corridor. And again, the relatively lower levels of traffic impacts in the beginning. So then, year two, some of the other roads, just like on the other side, and the consolidation centers start to come up for the Glanville Drive and bringing the railroad in to the south. We're still working on the bridges in the Stockton area, and again, similar levels of traffic. And now you can see some of the roads going in to the first maintenance shaft we're going to get to. We got to get in there and get starting to build it. We're still finishing some of these roads up here, and you can see now we've added the little road we talked about at the Port of Stockton leading up to the bridge. Obviously, until the bridges are done, you can't go across them. And then some of the roads down, but you can see some of the road work we did down there to relocate the Byron Highway is now finished. And again, some of these short projects have a high burn for a short. I mean, this one might only be a few weeks because it's not that long of a, and it's just an overlay in a small road. So then year four, the shafts are starting to pier, intakes starting. So these are the two longest, this is the longest drive, I think, and then this is pretty close to that same length. So they got to get going early in the project to keep, because they're going to drive the schedule. And again, some of the work required to get that site ready requires more trucks than this one because of the elevation and the need to move some fill around. And we got the tunnels moving, starting to build the shafts out in front. The second intake has started. We finished the bridge down here, so we're working on the railroad and the roads out to, and this shaft then can start as well. And then the pumps, since we've started here, the pump station has started and we've got the southern drive shaft starting to go in. And again, you can see now we're into year 5, the traffic is starting to pick up on the project, pretty much everywhere. So now into year 6, more shafts are starting to appear. There you got to stay out ahead of the tunneling. And all the other major sites are still active. And again, a lot of activity at the main tunneling sites and the intakes. Pretty much more shafts. We can see now that we've started tunneling, we're generating that material. It's going to come slinging around on the railroad, generated here and from up here, bringing it down here to start building the southern forebay. You can see the reception shafts for that southern tunnel appears now as well. So again, year 7, pretty much the whole project has traffic. Year 8 is some little nuances in shafts have been added in, and a couple of the roads that we had done before fall off because they're finished. So again, the traffic's pretty much peaked in 7 for the length, but it's pretty hot down in the South Delta, getting to the South Delta site. So then year 9, you can see we're passing some of the shafts, so they're completed, and we're starting to not use them. And now we've started the South Delta conveyance facilities on the south end of the Byron Highway. Again, you'll see that next week. Traffic's still pretty heavy, but starting to disperse a little. In year 10, you can see a lot of the shafts are no longer being constructed. That doesn't mean we've necessarily gone through them yet. There may be a small amount of work at all these shafts but the construction project to build them is mostly finished. Again, year 10, we're still major work in the south because we're really starting to pick up work on the pump station and all the structures and other things that go on in the south. Typical, it's pretty much the same level at the intakes and the main drives continuing on. And then now you can see as we get into year 11, the facility sites are starting to drop off. We've got the main reception shaft from this way and this way. Intake 3 stays on. Or, I mean, both intakes are still operational, and then virtually all the pieces down in the South Delta are still going. Traffic is beginning to drop off a little down there because some of where the big traffic things are is dirt moving and concrete pours. So that means basically what that's telling you, some of the concrete pours are starting to be completed. And again, year 12 is pretty much status quo. It's very similar to year 11. Again, pretty much the same traffic pattern. So now we're down to most of the construction projects are finished. The North Drive is done, so that we've already received it and completed the work at the intakes. So we're just waiting. I'd have to look at the detailed schedule, but we're just waiting to bring the last TBM out at Terminus. So there's actually some traffic there now, so that must be the actual receiving of the TBM that year. Then we go into 14, they'll have to finish the shaft in year 14. So again, the traffic is relatively light, finishing work in the south. And then again, we get to years 15 and 16, and it's commissioning. So we're back to really light traffic, firing stuff up, making sure it works, getting the bugs worked out of the system. It takes quite a while to do that with these big pumps and that kind of thing, to get them into commission and fix all the problems you have. And then in year 16, same thing, and we would be done. And so those are all the projects.
Mike, you have questions?
Comment for the southern 4-bay facilities. Even though it's not within the footprint, you're reaching a pinch point right down there with the coastal hills coming down, big migratory corridor for birds of prey, and you have really strong cultural sites along this area too, Vasco Hills, Brushy Peak and such. And also just outside of the footprint by the airport, by the Byron Airport. And I guess that same airport consideration is going to have to carry forward.
We've been looking at that.
Yeah, and then the vernal pool is right near there. Those are surface captures, so I'm not thinking any groundwater is going to be a problem there. However, just to consider that. And then Byron Hot Springs just to the north. I have no idea what the groundwater source is, if that's going to be at all impinged by the tunnel. But just to keep a thought about that, there's constantly the idea of refurbishing and redoing the Byron Hot Springs Hotel and Resort. So just to kind of keep that in mind. Thank you.
All right, Jim.
Curious, I mean, we have relative years here, relative year number 1 through 16.
Right.
So in your perfect world, what's the date for number 1?
I'm not even sure I know, so.
I mean, are we talking 20, 24, 25? And I'm trying to do this so I can make sure I'm available for the ribbon cutting in 25 years.
Is there a particular item that you wanted as a namesake?
Absolutely not. But I would really like to know if you have a sense for what, I mean, I know this is a one of those really squishy questions that Carrie wishes she didn't have to address with you, but I think it's a legit question.
This is why we let her come to these meetings.
Let me.
So we're looking at permitting most of the permits by the end of 2022, but there is a period between that and when construction starts that I think would be at least 3 to 5 years. I don't think we have a timeline identified for that yet.
So you're really talking 2027 timeframe?
I'm nervous even putting dates to it because I don't know yet. We haven't done that scheduling of the design work and some of those details, so I don't know.
Yeah, the predecessor would be getting the CEQA and the Stewardship Council and the point of diversion approvals. And then it's what mitigation projects have to get done. That's another thing that's not in this presentation. So what mitigation projects have to take place before we can then start our construction. And then obviously you have the land acquisition that could be dragged on in certain areas. And then you've got the Army Corps permit to start the intakes that may require some mitigation somewhere else that needs to get done. So it's right now, it's kind of, you can, Jim, this is your world. You know how much a crapshoot it is to predict how long it would take to get that string of things done to start construction. So I actually think your guess is as good as ours on this.
Mine is sometime in the way future. Thanks, though. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Phil, you looked like you were.
So this presentation really underscored to me that this project, if it occurs, is going to make a lot of people very mad in this area. Pretty much every demographic or cultural community is going to have a lot of things to say about this project. Whether you go through the Delta, through the center of the Delta, and really you're dealing with a lot of environmental impacts to ecosystems, or along the sides of the Delta, kind of on the periphery, where you're going to impact a lot of people in Stockton. What types of goodwill campaigns are you guys considering? Because I can tell you, fact, everybody that I know in Stockton, if they looked at this, they would be very irritated because it's going to have a lot of impacts on us. So what types of goodwill what types of goodwill projects is there room for? Are there room for? I'm curious.
So as we work with all of you and continue in this process, some of the upcoming meetings are going to look for, as a minimum, dual purpose benefits of some of these facilities. Leaving behind where we have excess material and providing facilities for the reclamation districts to potentially get material to help with their levee maintenance. There's the potential of creating some recreational spots we've heard that the boating community is looking for more docking locations. There is a possibility of leaving the rail depot behind, if that's something that benefits moving agricultural goods in the Delta more easily. So there's that issue of where there's dual benefits. And then there's obviously the environmental mitigation work that Carrie's team will be proposing as part of this project. And then on top of that, there may need to be additional work to make this a reality.
Yeah, on the mitigation side, we're just, I know I say this a lot and you all are probably tired of it, but we haven't done it yet. So we're working on, the general process flow is that we need to have a project to analyze. We'll analyze the potential impacts, and then we'll think about the types of mitigation and benefits that we can have related to those impacts to try to reduce, avoid, or offset in some way. So it's coming down the road, but we're not there yet.
Gil.
A couple of questions. The first question is, what's the estimated cubic yards needed for the new 4-bay levees? And then the second question is, we've gone through the impacts where the launches or the shafts are and access to the shafts. What's going to go along? Is there any action going on along the pipeline alignment itself? Will those properties be impacted at the surface at all?
I'll let Graham talk about the forebay quantity.
So the fill volume required for the southern forebay is about 7 million cubic yards.
Can you, wait, and the total amount that we expect to generate is,
Around 10 million cubic yards.
okay, so 3 million in excess. Yeah.
And there's a few from a few other places.
There's some slop in there.
There's some slop in there a little bit.
As there should be.
Relative to the, in between shafts, basically, people who live along that alignment, other than there may be right-of-way issues, probably won't even know they're there unless something happens. And that's, anybody who knows anything about tunnels, if something happens, there may have to be an intervention. That would be an emergency, because that's the whole idea of placing these maintenance shafts is to help. I'm not going to use the bad word of eliminate. You're an engineer, we don't say those words, but to help really minimize the chances of having those kinds of problems. But basically the people who are, or if you were right above the tunnel, you shouldn't even know it's down there.
The last plan included dewatering along the pipeline. That's not going to happen this time.
Only to what's necessary to build the actual shafts. And I think most of that shaft gets built in the wet by sinking D-walls. And then I'm not an expert at the construction of the D-walls, but it's minimal dewatering to build those sites.
Anna, and then David. Did I see your hand up, Mike? Yes, please. Okay, so, and Peter. Okay, so we're going to go Anna, Mike, Peter, and then David. Just walk it.
This project amazes me every time we sit through one of these meetings. And I'm absolutely shocked that for something that won't come online until 2043, my child, who's 13 right now, will be 36 years old. What you all are proposing to place upon them financially for a benefit that is over 23 years away is not, it's almost criminal what you're trying to place upon future generations, because I'm just thinking about the advancement of technology. I grew up and I didn't have a cell phone, and I used to print out GPS coordinates to go driving, right? And now I have a phone that basically talks to me and tells me where I'm going to go. So in the 23 years, between now and when this thing is online, imagine all of the things that are going to come to light. And what's happening is the state of California Department of Water Resources is being very short-sighted, and you're placing a huge debt based upon some guesses and some processes that maybe we don't all agree on, and clearly it's going to be destructive to the Delta. Clearly it's going to be destructive to the multi-generational families in the recreation and to the reclamation districts. But what I'm saying is, I don't believe that you have the right to place that type of a burden financially on the children of California for the forever and ever and ever future. Because we've read your technical report, the price tag is something that keeps jumping and elevating. I won't even bring up the train or the dam that Santa Clara has to drain in October because it's not being maintained, or Oroville, or any of those things. But I just want to be crystal clear. I want this moment. I want my children to look back at this moment and realize that their mom did not want them or any of their peers to be stuck with this debt that's going to destroy historical lands. It's going to hurt our Native American friends. It's going to hurt so many people in the state of California at such an extreme price tag based upon assumptions and guesses and technology that was basically developed when I was a child. And I just want you to think about that. I didn't carry a cell phone around, and now it's something that is with me every day, right? So I really want you guys to think about that and to have that impact. There's a lot of people who don't understand the price of money gets more and more expensive as time goes on.
Okay. So the scope of this meeting, of course, is engineering. And so I'm going to kick it over to Mike.
Just as far as the mitigation, and what Phil said was really interesting with the goodwill effort. And that I know those things go in a sequence, but if there's just somehow to make that sequence public so that folks can actually see that there is that mitigation coming down the line, there could be some public benefit coming down the line. Talking to Eastern Contra Costa County, HCP, and other jurisdictions that might be really eager to look for mitigation funding in projects where this to actually take place, and to have that up front as a possibility. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Okay, Peter.
Thank you. I've been talking about recreation and specifically about bigger boats and things on the Delta, but I also want to talk a little bit about the other things, what I'll call the foot recreation that happens on the Delta. Huge, huge print that we have there. Family hiking, parks, shore fishing as opposed to boat fishing that you see happening all the time. And non-powered craft, what I'll call paddle sups and those type of things, are becoming a huge part of the over 4 million recreational boaters here in California. And we recognize and embrace them, and they need specific things. So when you're talking about your for the good and things like that, keep those kind of projects in mind. They're not horrendously expensive, but the impact on them really, really goes a long, long way for all kinds of people who are doing that. So you bring in different economic structures into recreating on the Delta. Thank you.
Okay, David, and again, we're kind of in that space where we're asking for clarifications on this, and we're kind of rolling into the roundtable discussion. So if you need any other clarifications on this issue, please do so. And then I'm going to do a commercial about tours.
Oh, Val, I have some questions for the committee before we move on to that. So as soon as everyone's done with their questions, I got a couple for a couple people here.
Comment and a question. So comment-wise, this sequence was really great. If you could overlay like the tunnel being built along the way, so it's year 1, year 2, just with a highlighted section would be interesting to see.
We wanted to do that too. Sorry, it got a little late on
Yeah.
That was slated for 2 a.m.
Yeah, that was.
for the future. And then the other thing was, it sounded as though you made a comment that the eastern one was easier to do. It's next to Highway 5 and this and that, but yet the schedule looks like it's the same number of years. Is it the same number? It's the same cost, or does the easiness convert to time and money anywhere?
I can't comment on cost right now because there isn't an actual cost estimate. It's not part of the CEQA process.
The time.
There is some of the drives are a little bit longer, but remember, it's about how you schedule the drives that sets the schedule. So it came out, and we can do them both. If you looked at the sequence, you can see there's a little bit more going on in year 14 on East than there was on Central. So it is a little bit longer, but not much.
Yeah, David, what will drive it is if you can go, it's 2 miles a year, so the longest drive kind of sets that duration. So it's the logistics that has to happen to then do that really long drive, and then to take the TBM out. That will be the long lead. And whether you're on the Central or the East corridor, that longest drive, which is sort of
If I saw the tunnel thing on here,
Yeah,
I would see every
then you
year.
would see why.
Every year the segment would grow by the same
And so
amount.
the longest drive on the East is slightly longer than the longest drive on the Central, which then makes the overall schedule just slightly longer on the East. But the logistics, some of the logistics projects are just a little bit easier on the East because you're closer to I-5.
So besides how long it takes longer to build the eastern alignment, is there any other reason that we will not go for the eastern alignment?
At this point in time, I'm not judging the 2 alignments. That's for the CEQA process to do. So I really can't answer your question on that. We're evaluating both of them equally, and then we're going to let the people who do that sort of analysis look at them and decide which one is a better choice.
Okay, Gil.
So the recent NOP described the finished product as a tunnel, dual conveyance. So you'd have the tunnel and you'd have the pathway through the delta. Is the DCA going to work on the timing and the improvements needed to stabilize the levees along through the delta pathway?
There are other programs at DWR that are aiming to consider delta improvements.
Timing and how it dovetails with the timing of the tunnel construction.
I'm not sure. I'll follow up, though.
Okay, are there any other clarifying? Cece?
Allude to using, for instance, spoils to improve the ability to carry on agriculture in the area, and as a side product or a byproduct of this project to make improvements in the delta. But I don't know how agriculture is going to be able to carry on when you divert water from up there out of the delta. Already the species have suffered mightily from overdrafting of water from the delta. Now you're going to put 3 more separate intakes in addition to the through delta water removal. How are you going to support species in agriculture when you're removing so much water? I'd like to see the answer to that.
So that's something that'll be analyzed in detail in the EIR.
Yeah.
There's trade-offs in where the water moves and where it comes out. It's essentially the same water on one side or the other.
It is, but I did want to, and so I don't want to get into this too much. It is a big part of the CEQA analysis, but we are trying to, the idea is to divert at high flow times where it wouldn't affect downstream users or species. So.
Okay, oh, Mike. And by the way, we really want to encourage folks to ask questions. I know that there's still a few folks who haven't really made comments today. We really invite you to contemplate that and participate at a level that you're comfortable. Mike?
Yes. Today's conversation, clearly points out that the interests in Solano aren't necessarily going to be quite as acute as those along the alignments. However, the discussion did bring to the table the impacts that might be occasioned by the mitigations. And I want to make known very clearly that Solano County region, particularly the North Delta region and the Yola bypass, are bearing an unusually heavy burden for supporting diversions in the State Water Project. And that is going to be one of the major issues that Solano will have to be addressed with the Solano County users. There are at least 7 ongoing projects that potentially meet SWP obligations, for which there is no necessary benefit. Necessarily, there's no benefit in Solano County for those, and it has an impact on the agricultural community that has yet been not well discussed and nor addressed by the state.
All right. Anna, one more.
What I was expecting today when we saw this was what the impact will be on properties across from the intakes. So we kind of have touched on that, and then we said we would talk about it later. I want to see some more detail about what will happen to the levees that are, and the homes and the folks that are directly across from the intakes, if it is a option or an opportunity to armor those levees, if you're going to have to set back homes or any of those type of details. I think that it would be really great to have some sort of an illustration such as this that would show us which properties could potentially be in that footprint of impact directly across from the intakes.
One of our future topics, and it's really contingent upon Graham finishing the levee studies, is to talk more thoroughly about how the existing levees will be addressed as part of the construction of this project. And a lot of the questions stem, Gil, from some of your testimony. That'll be part of what we cover in that presentation. But we definitely plan to bring that here so that you clearly understand. Some of the levee projects that we think that we may need to do as part of this project haven't been shown yet. We're just not there yet, but we will be. Sure.
Sean?
Is that there's some flexibility in terms of the placement of the maintenance and the reception shafts? How would you bracket those on the map in terms of the wiggle room north to south?
Generally, we want to keep in the 5-ish miles. None of these drives are 15 miles, I don't believe. I think they're all slightly less. So as long as the shafts can stay in that 5-ish, 5.5 is probably okay, 4 is okay, that kind of thing. So that's sort of how, so we can make sure we can keep the health of the TBM. But one of the things you're going to probably find, if what we found when we get out there, is looking for places that, aren't next to somebody's home, aren't next to a refuge area, not next to some sort of preserve. It starts to focus you in certain areas, and then when you set one and you got to go 5 miles, or you don't want to go too much more than 5 miles, you get kind of trapped into the places that are available to you. So that's the challenge.
And Sean, the way I looked at it, because we've all been kind of playing this game here, I'd go 4 to maybe upwards of 5.5. But remember that when you're at 4, you don't want to end up adding another shaft, because the next distance to get to the next one ends up being like 6 miles, and then you start getting into that zone where it's a long way to go without a maintenance shaft. So again, it's a little bit iterative. You might go 4 here and then 5.5 here, stretch this one out a little bit. But that's the kind of wiggle room that we've been working in our analyses.
And they don't have to be in a straight line. I don't want to do too much zigzagging, but they can do a little
jogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would add one item, Sean. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we presented some figures that show some of the different considerations, and so you can see, looking at those maps, which areas are excluded because of the preserves and other features that Phil talked about. And so you can get a sense of how much flexibility there is in those sites, but it was in the figures that were discussed 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I remember them.
All right.
Val, can I ask a couple questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, the barge landing location there that was on the east alignment on that the Deepwater Ship Canal, did anyone have any thoughts on that in terms of a way? Obviously we're looking. That's a central hub. That's a launch shaft. So there's a lot of traffic there. That means liners have to go there, and RTM is generated. So anyone have any comments on the idea of the barge there versus extending rail in that area?
Where are they coming from and where are they going to? If you're so close to rail, why would you have barges?
Well, it's one or the other, right? One of the advantages of barge is that there will be excess material generated there, and then that could then turn into an area where it could easily be, the material could be swung around the delta using barges. So that's one of the advantages of the barge is kind of the leave behind there. And then one of the advantages of the rail is the close proximity to Stockton for wheeling materials. Stockton has a significant capacity for concrete and liner manufacture. So again, a lot of these barge and rail ideas are all about removing tremendous amounts of traffic off the roads, significant amounts. So that's where we put these launch sites is we'd also like those to coincide with places where that material could be either wheeled around easily by others or used in that location.
Philip.
Well, Peter was...
Peter, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. One of the hassles you have with the barges is not the barges, it's the bridges. I'm not sure whether you have anybody tracking our Delta bridges on a regular basis now with their uptime, downtime. They're old, I mean extremely old, and they're out of service in a huge amount of time. And most of your barges won't quite get underneath them. They're going to have to open them.
Yeah.
And when you do that, traffic's screwed up forever on the water and on land, on the highways. So I would, if I had the druthers, I'd go with rail. I really would. We're going to have a bridge that's going to be out for 4 months.
But do you have bridges going up and down with a barge landing there on the deep ship canal?
No, but when you come out of it, they do. Yeah. Okay? The Sacramento Deepwater Channel has nothing until you get down to the edge of Ryer Island.
Right.
Those type of things. So that's the real hook when you're going to push that trade-off.
All right, Phil.
Regarding the possibility of rail, so just to be clear, the material, the muck, the RTM material, you would want to, if by rail, take it and potentially find people in Stockton or companies in Stockton that might be interested in using it for concrete construction or things of that nature?
No, not the RTM, the tunnel liners, the segmental liners that go in the tunnel. That's a major delivery to a launch site.
It'd get constructed at a yard in Stockton and then shipped out.
No, in terms of the RTM, we just know that we can swing it to a lot of places on rail. There's a ton of flexibility. I mean, it almost opens up the whole western U.S. on that line. I know it kills her.
Santa Clara, and they were shipping the muck to Tracy. So does anybody here know that where in Tracy are they shipping the muck to?
We did hear about that. We're going to follow up. I had heard that it was being used for some kind of agricultural purpose, but I'm not sure. But we'll follow up on that and get an answer. And they were trucking it still wet, and yeah. No, it was a waterproof truck, so watertight, but heavy loads.
Mike.
Well, I guess I think it's a discussion that needs further review, because it seems to me that given that we're working in the Delta, soils that are competent for levee repairs or levee improvements actually is a valuable resource, and the barges are typically going to be much easier to move to construction sites where it can be effectively used for levee improvements. Rail obviously has single points of delivery or multiple points of delivery along the rail line, which then would entail trucking anyway. I guess I wouldn't foreclose that option at all at this point. As a matter of fact, from my perspective, in terms of delta levee improvements and flood management issues, that barges could be quite valuable in that regard.
Yeah, so going back to rail, one thing I would point out is that based off of where that spur travels through in Stockton, getting anything in and out of Rough and Ready Island, it's mostly going to be really low-income areas that are going to be affected by the noise and the traffic impacts. Stockton has not invested in overpasses or underpasses over any of the rail lines that go through South Stockton. So getting anything in and out of that, you are going to be causing a lot of bottlenecks, particularly in the area just south and west of downtown Stockton. So there will be probably at certain points when the traffic is heavy, of course, there would be serious impacts in Stockton, I think.
Any other? Oh, okay, Mike.
Coming out of that Stockton site or that Lower Roberts Island launch, does that need to go over to the southern forebay? Do we know yet?
Go ahead.
Coming out of Lower Roberts, so we know we'll be generating material down at the southern forebay drilling to Lower Roberts, but you're right, there will be material generated at that site as we drill north. It's going to depend on the schedule and the timing. If needed, we could swing it around, as Catherine's described, from Twin Cities down to the southern forebay. It will boil down to the schedule.
Yeah, because we have rail up there and we know we can swing rail around, that's probably where we need, if, the way I think it in my mind, 16 miles worth of tunneling is what feeds him, and the distance from the southern forebay up to that location is around 13 and a half. So they're like, we're 2.5 miles short. So 2.5 miles worth of tunnel material has got to swing around there to balance that out. So that leaves excess in both those locations. I had two other things that I just want, as you think about providing feedback on the presentation today, Cecile in particular, we're very sensitive about emergency access and how this project may impact the ability for emergency vehicles to get around. So if you could spend some time pointing out some areas where you have some concern so that we can make sure that that gets addressed. Don't necessarily have to answer it now. It might take some time to think about. But if you do have something to offer, that would be helpful.
I can answer now.
Sure.
Highway 12 and Highway 160 and the connecting roads between them and Highway 5 are very critical, and they're very heavily trafficked.
Yeah.
I don't know how you're going to get emergency vehicles through when you add more traffic to the traffic that's there right now. There's a lot of shipping, a lot of semis that use those roads also. And I think that's a huge concern.
Okay, so we're going to spend some time thinking about how we deal with that, whether it's some shouldering, some widening. Do we need to place emergency vehicles in certain areas so that we can mitigate that? Just, I'm not allowed to use that word. Reduce the effect. If there's certain hot spots, so 12 obviously is heavily trafficked, and I think 160, we don't plan on putting any traffic on 160, so that's good.
But it accesses the Delta from the west side.
Okay. So anything coming off of I-5 to inward? Okay. Right.
Question, but I think the other part of that question should be, what's the capacity for emergency services, especially in the North Delta? There aren't any.
Right. Agree.
So crowded now, those roads, you would almost have to put in new roads, other highways. I don't know how you can work with what it is now because it's barely working now.
Okay.
And we have constant accidents because of that.
Yeah. So again, if in particular around the public safety aspect, if you have ideas or areas of particular concern, if you include those in your comments in the meeting, that'd be extremely helpful, because we want to make sure we deal with those.
Okay.
And I also had just a thought. There has been some discussion with our rail consultant that leaving behind that rail depot up north is something that may be of benefit to the Delta in terms of agricultural goods. We do have an agricultural rep who's not here today, but that would be something that if it was of benefit would be certainly something that could be left behind. If it's not, it obviously wouldn't be, but a question there. That was it for me.
Okay, Douglas?
Well, historically, there was a railroad going from Ronald Grove to Sacramento. So we always had, you used to have a railroad, but we just don't use it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, Jim?
It's been a long time since it's been a railroad, and ag has grown in the Delta.
It has.
So, I'm not so sure that leaving a railroad is a siding or extra tracks is going to do anything well, look at all the farmers are going to be dead by the time this project's over anyway. So no, look, I don't mean to be caustic like that, but I think that leaving the railroad is a really big concern of mine. I think it needs to be pulled out at the end of the day.
Just curious. Yeah.
All right. Was there anything else you wanted to address, Catherine?
No, those were just some notes I had as Phil was flipping through.
Okay.
Then, what we're going to do next is get into public comments on the agendized item. So what we've gone through today with, basically we managed to get some really great input from the folks here. Now we need to get comment from the public out there. And the first card that I have is, and there is, by the way, a microphone right here. And so Barbara Daly, if you would please address us.
I think it's on.
Is it on? You can hear me? Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. My name is, my name is Barbara Daly. I'm with a group called North Delta Cares in the North Delta, and I have a question about the last presentation. And I believe it's Jennifer who's sitting down on the end. Is that your name, DWR? Karen Buckman, I'm sorry. Karen, you said, we were talking about the Goodwill campaign, and you said, well, don't worry, we haven't started yet because Catherine Mallon was listing many of the Goodwill items. But then when I walked in, I'm sorry I was late and I might have missed something, but that might have made sense to me, but this doesn't. He was saying, we're beginning to work, though, at the Port of Stockton. So have you already, and I wrote it down, quote, so have you already started some of these projects?
No, so just to check in, is it okay if I answer questions? Okay, so I don't remember the specific citation about the Port of Stockton, but I believe what Phil was trying to say was we've started working with those ideas. We definitely have not started any projects at all. The way that we're proceeding, we have to complete CEQA before we even consider it, and then we need to go through the associated other environmental permits. There are quite a few, so no construction. And just to clarify what I was talking about the Goodwill campaign, I was really talking about the mitigation options, so that before we identify mitigation under CEQA, we look at what the impacts would be, and then we try to focus ideas to avoid, reduce, or offset on those impacts that we've identified through CEQA.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarification, I just received clarification. When in fact someone's giving a comment, they need to give their comment within their full comment within 3 minutes, et cetera. And then if there's a clarifying comment that needs to be made by the staff to ensure that everything is accurate, then we can go ahead and do that.
Okay,
Thank you, Claudia.
And also this will be a little different from the agendized item versus the non-agendized item, because we can't really comment on the non-agendized item, but we're on agendized items still. So, OSHA Meserve, you have something for agendized item.
Good afternoon, OSHA Meserve. I'm going to make a couple comments on behalf of Friends of Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge Association. I think I mentioned this before, but might have got glossed over, and I just want to make a comment about the way the maps are coming together. Stone Lakes National Wildlife Refuge is a boundary that's designated by Congress, and it includes the entire area. The way you have it on the maps here, you only include the lands that actually have been purchased by the public or are under easement within that area. So I do not believe that this is mapped properly right now. If you go look at the big map over there, and that's also reflected on the maps we've been looking at today, the entire boundary of the refuge needs to be included, and anything that goes through that boundary would be considered within a National Wildlife Refuge. Just because Fish and Wildlife Service hasn't purchased that property yet doesn't mean that it couldn't be purchased, and it was set aside that way for Congress. There's also private lands within that same area that are in agriculture. Nothing would be purchased unless it was a willing seller by Fish and Wildlife Service, and that's one of the good partnerships that the service has had with our local area. So I would really encourage you to take a closer look at that, and I think Sean mentioned it, but I want to underline that saying that Hood-Franklin Road is one of your main haul routes right through the refuge and right past their just finished the Blue Heron Trail, and where all the kids come to learn about wetlands and birds, is not appropriate at all. And I think we need to be sensitive to a lot of different kinds of people and different animals, and certainly saying that Hood-Franklin Road is a main haul route is completely unacceptable, and I'm really surprised that after everything that we went through in the last round of this project, that this group is still saying that Hood-Franklin Road would be that. And I think also with respect to the intake map, or sorry, the map over here, which I guess I'm getting slightly off agenda, but I'm just going to stay with it, is that it doesn't include all the thousands of agricultural and other intakes that are in the Delta. And I think in order, I don't know if you want to put it on a separate map, but it's not correct to say that it's only the municipal intakes and outfalls that should be on the map. There's thousands of intakes that we need to be worrying about and that you guys should be planning around. Thank you.
Next, we have Dan Whaley. And this is for the agendized items.
I just have a couple, three quick comments. In looking at your map over the extension from Elk Grove Boulevard to where you propose the first intake is a much shorter distance and much less intrusive. But the problem I see is you haven't included the city of Elk Grove in this process, and I think you need to stop and include them. They have already approved a $1 billion hospital emergency center right at I-5 and Elk Grove Boulevard, so I would request that you analyze how that's going to be affected by pile driving. I also think that the interchange, the Clemmer Road extension interchange that's going to go from 99 to the town of Franklin and eventually to I-5 affects everything you're talking about doing and is not included and should be analyzed before you go forward. I also see that you're covering railroad tracks at Freeport, and there's no real explanation why these historical railroad spurs are currently being covered by rock by DWR. And then finally, if the independent studies technical report that we heard about last time is being disregarded because you think you have better ideas, how are we to trust an independent technical studies on the muck materials to know that you won't also ignore their ideas as well? And then final question is, if it cost $1 billion to fix the 1,700-foot spillway at Oroville, how can you say that this 35-mile tunnel is not going to cost more than $70 billion? And shouldn't we have a construction cost before we start a project? Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let us then move on to.
Okay, we are going to have a quick discussion of, previously we referred to it more of the roundtable discussion. It is about the outreach that you're doing. It's about issues that we need to raise in future meetings, questions you may want to include on our Q&A grid, which continues to be a work in progress. If you're noticing each meeting, it gets updated. It's not perfect. Again, it's a tool. It's a vehicle to try to answer questions. But again, it's a tool. So we'll continue to update that and provide answers to those questions. So we're going to do this for about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on what level of participation or what questions or comments folks might have.
So if I could just clarify, these are things then that you guys can bring up that haven't been agendized that you want to add to.
But it does still need to stay within the scope, obviously, of the meeting. Exactly. Okay. So, Ceci.
To know a list of the soil conditioners that will be used in the fluids. It says here that I was responded to, but I have not received that.
Okay. Okay. And Jim.
Address that question. Wouldn't it be easier just to get BASF to give you a whole bunch of material safety data sheets so we can see what's going on?
Yeah, we talked about this at the last meeting. I think Andrew talked about that it was, I think he called it sort of in the SOAP family. A lot of these materials are proprietary of the driller. And then they're constantly evolving, improving, changing. So something that we show you today from, let's say, the project site that Douglas was on probably won't necessarily be used 6 or 7, or as you would say, in your lifetime when we start this project. So we'll definitely give you the information that exists today. We can't guarantee that anyone would use that product necessarily, but we can give you the range of industry products that are out there. We'll do that. We'll add that to the list of questions.
Okay, great.
I think that's why Andrew thought that he had answered it at the last meeting, so apologize if you didn't feel it was well answered.
For the actual names of the substances.
Okay.
Okay. And again,
we can give you names of things that are used today. All I'm going to say is that I can't guarantee that it will be the same products that will be used in the future. Okay, thanks.
And thank you for coming at it again, Cece, because sometimes we think we've answered it, but we haven't. And so, feel free to come back and say, hey, this is what I meant. We're all human, so that sort of interaction is really helpful. Ms. Anna.
Looking at your internal technical review panel and for the ITR December workshops, and what I would like to see is copies of the materials that were provided to these engineers, including stakeholder concerns. There's a whole list of documents that was provided, including California Water Fix Conceptual Engineering Report. I would like copies of all of the documents that were provided to that technical team. And then my last comment is the Delta Protection Commission is doing a really great job of pushing forward our national heritage movement here in the Delta. We are very lucky, and we are actually a national heritage area. And I feel a little dismayed that these parallel processes are happening. I actually wrote down, because one of the comments of Catherine was, oh, we're working with them. Well, what I see is you need to work with everyone who's existing in the Delta and are pushing these processes forward, because while you're planning away, they're physically implementing a plan that you might just drop an intake on top of, or they're doing improvements on an area that might not exist. And so I don't want to see the Delta Protection Commission's actions with our national heritage status being wasted on areas where they won't be of significance or relevance due to this project, right? So there has to be more collaboration and it's a fellow Department of Water Resources, Delta Protection Commission. At least you should be talking. That's my point.
Carrie and I will be at their meeting on March 19th in Stockton.
All right. Jim, yes.
Sorry to keep doing this, but look, Anna, I met with the new consultants for the National Heritage Area, and to put this in the right perspective, the National Heritage Area, when it was authorized, there was language in there that said you can't use the tunnel to stop, you can't use the National Heritage Area to stop the tunnel. DPC right now is saying, yes, we're aware of the tunnel, but we're not going to really address it in the National Heritage Management Plan. So in sense, that's part of what I'm supposed to do here. National Heritage Area Management Plan is moving forward, but the tunnel in this diversion conveyance project is sort of being sidelined, if you will, as a project that's not terribly important to it right now. So that's the way it's been for the last year when we got the word. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
I am going to point out, by the way, that we are after 6, so just kind of raising awareness of time. David.
Regarding the question and answer table, it would be great. I'm assuming the numbering will settle down, because there was an earlier numbering and then there was a newer numbering, and I couldn't find so if that is standardized, that would be great, or at least give us a map to the older numbering or something. And then it would be great to get the Excel version of that, so I can filter like all of mine and see how mine have been responded to or closed out. And I would like to suggest having something of a closed identifier, because just because it was responded to, a couple of my items, like it was great to get a response, but they're still kind of open in my mind. And so it'd be great to maybe one-on-one, if we need to, we can have conversations, and maybe there's a closed thing when everybody agrees that it can't get any further.
Sounds good.
I think if anyone feels that some of these questions aren't truly closed out, just send us a note. We'll open them back up. That's not a problem.
And again, it's a relationship that we're building here. We're working really hard to build it. So, you know, if there is a question, or if in fact we didn't answer something to your satisfaction, please come back. Because sometimes it's not that we're not trying not to answer your question. It's that maybe we didn't understand fully what the question was, or in translation, or something along those lines. So let's, you know, we want to be able to communicate with you freely and get it right. Okay? Any other questions? Oh, Mike.
Outreach that we're doing out in the southwestern part of the Delta. David brought up a really good point. The Frank's Track Futures project is really, as far as the public is concerned, tied very tightly to this. And so I will be speaking with the Municipal Advisory Committee, not about this project, but about Frank's Track Futures. I'm sure that we'll get a lot of questions about this project, about that. So we'll be guiding folks to information sources on that. We did host a program about why tunnels are even being proposed over at Big Break. And we had about 15 people show up, including a representative from Senator Glazer's office. It was very well received. We generated lots of confusion, so I was pretty clear about, pretty happy about that. We're happy to see proposals from DCA about outreach to non-classic Delta users, so beyond the boating agricultural community, folks who live in cities, water users and things like that, who are along Pittsburgh Antioch shoreline, who don't even know, for a lot of folks, that the Delta is there and what it provides for them. And the folks from the National Heritage Area showed up, and we had the same thing, is that the tunnel was broached, and we talked about the tunnel project, and they gave us the same iteration, that the information that it wasn't really to be considered in this project. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I promised you a commercial about tours. As you heard earlier, Douglas went on the tour to the tunnel launch shaft. We do have a couple other tours coming up. You could see firsthand the discussion, the elements of the discussion we had today. On March 19th, we'll be touring the corridors. Those who are signed up at this point are Douglas and Barbara Bergen-Perea. On March 24th is the other day we're going to be doing this. Again, these are the corridor tours. The folks who are signed up are Jim Cox, Anna Swenson, Sean Worth, and Karen Mann. Please let us know if I got those dates wrong, or if in fact you need to change, or if you haven't signed up and you want to, because we definitely want as many people as possible to participate. The final tour that we're looking at this point is the ISI fish screen manufacturer and intake. So you're hitting two different spots. The folks, that's on April 14th. Those who are signed up right now are Douglas Shea, Jim Cox, Karen Mann, and Barbara Bergen-Perea. So again, let us know if in fact you haven't signed up and you want to participate. Again, Douglas, I think, can speak to the fact that it's not a, it really is instructional, really educational to be able to touch and feel the things that we're talking about conceptually on PowerPoints. So there's that. Ms. Anna.
How do we, there's folks that I've talked to in the last 2 weeks that want to join us on that tour. So how do we sign them up? They're like landowners within the corridor section. So how do we do that?
I'm looking at Josh because we had this very conversation.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we're not going to be able to open the tours up to the public, and we're ensuring that less than a quorum of the committee attends each tour, just so it's not technically a meeting of the SEC.
So there's that. I know the outreach team was all excited to include folks, but we just can't do it.
Can they follow us in their own private vehicles?
I don't know. We'll have that conversation.
Yeah, we'll talk about that one in follow-up.
Yeah, because it feels not very community-oriented to exclude the very people who you intend to put the corridor through. I mean, they should have the right to know too.
That's a comment that you would like us to have of a separate public tours, then we can take that under consideration. But what we want to first focus on is this SEC process. So we'll take that under as a comment.
Okay.
And then finally, we do have some more public comment that we need to take as part of the process, but I think we also have a questionnaire that did you want to address?
It's been passed out.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, all right. And so to the questionnaire that's been passed out, note that everyone on this committee is on this committee for a reason. Yes, we're passionate about the Delta and passionate about learning and discussing this project, but you also represent a certain constituency, and the use of this questionnaire is specific. It really is drilling down in a very, very, very specific way, asking you to put your constituency hat on, your agriculture hat on, your aquatic hat on, whatever your hat is that you're representing, the specific community or organization. Please put that hat on and look differently at this project and see. We want to get that sort of feedback from you because it's really, really critical, really, really important as we move this forward. And so.
Well, we have public comment now, and it's a little strange. We have first non-agendized SEC questions or comments from the last little iteration that we had here, but then general public comment. So only have one person on this, and that's Dan Whaley. So Dan, you can roll your two comments together if you like in terms of how you want to address.
He says no.
You're good? Okay, you're good. All right, then I do believe we've got a next meeting. Oh, what?
There you go.
Yep, I got it. Okay, good. We have a next meeting. Our next meeting is on Wednesday, March 25th, and it's again from 3 to 6. Hopefully we'll be out right. And that is back at Bellevue Vineyards on Sherman Island Cross Road. And again, you're going to have your member questionnaire responses and that kind of thing. And other than that, this meeting is one more.
You're missing on the agenda the South Delta facilities. We're going to go through that at that meeting as well.
Okay. It's not on my agenda. Okay, so.
It's not.
So there is one more slide.
One more slide.
And
Let's see one more slide.
Nope, there isn't. Okay.
Actually was one more.
You don't believe me. Have a good evening.
Things
and
change.
thank you
Thanks, guys.
And folks, stay healthy. Wash your hands.